forever for history.
Oh my God! There's no way.
Fabiano smiling. This is immortality stuff.
MVL is on the doorstep here. Look at the confidence that he's playing with. It's all over.
12 seconds.
UG7.
Maxime Vachier-Lagrave is the winner of the CrunchLabs Masters.
Black simply takes and goes rook d1 and picks up White's bishop, and he'll let his clock run out. Alexander Grischuk, he does it.
Wow, 1 second, and he's blundered Duda. He's just gone from winning to losing in one move. This is just madness.
Right with the team, cause you know that we winning, we with it, we going, we flowing again.
Magnus Magic. He's done it again.
When you need to win against Magnus Carlsen, not sure what to recommend.
This is just knockout.
Is he trying for a stalemate trap there?
That was so sneaky.
Really, y'all don't know this, y'all in danger, I'm a threat.
Checkmate in one coming in. These are the last.
Oh, and he's losing!
And Magnus cannot believe it. He's so mad at himself.
Wow, you never see this. Absolute hats off.
Welcome one and all to the Champions Chess Tour and the Julius Baer Generation Cup. Today we cover the lower bracket quarterfinals and the winners bracket semifinals. I'm John Sargent, and joining me is International Master, Woman Grandmaster, Asian Champion, two-time National Champion, three-time Commonwealth Champion, a World Team Championship silver medalist, until recently a FIDE Olympiad bronze medalist, now a gold medalist, two-time Olympiad individual medal winner, Olympic TV presenter, and Chess.com commentator. It's Tanya Sachdev. How are you doing, Tanya? Can I call you Tanya for short? Because that's a lot.
John, after that introduction, I'm doing great. I didn't want you to stop at any moment, but thank you so much. Still sinking in with everything that's happened over the last week. It's been a lot and it's been awesome.
And today, it's only going to get more awesome. We're starting to get a little bit spicy now, of course, in the losers bracket. We're starting to lose some really, really big names in the chess world, and we get both winners semifinals as well. So there's still more chess to go after today, but in terms of importance, today's a pretty big day.
It really is, because we're going to have two players who will get eliminated. So 4 players in danger zone. John, a lot on the line. And we know that this is the final event for the qualification to get to Oslo. You really want to do that. That's happening at the end of the year. December 17 is when it starts. And Julius Baer Generation Cup, that's where it's at. You win it, you punch your golden ticket.
Exactly right. So this has been quite a long journey so far. At the start of the year, we had the Chessable Masters and then moved through the Chess.com Classic just before the mid-year point. The CrunchLabs Masters, of course, allowed us to get our third name in the hat who are guaranteed a spot in Oslo. And today we cover some of the games from the Julius Baer Generation Cup. So this is all building up, of course, to the finals in Oslo towards Christmas, 17th to the 21st of December, where it all comes to a head with 8 players battling it out for glory and a pretty chunk of change in prize money as well.
$500,000 sounds pretty good to get it all before Christmas. And as you said, we've got 3 players who've already punched that ticket to that Oslo final. Magnus Carlsen was the first to do it. Then we had Alireza Firouzja with a great performance in that second event, and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, another Frenchman, to do it. And now we've got 5 more players, 5 more seats remaining. And we've got the losers bracket that starts. We've got 4 players fighting out. 2 will be eliminated. 2 very juicy matchups, John.
Well, I want to talk to you about that, Tanya, because we have some really, really strong names in this tournament. No doubt about that. I'm genuinely surprised to see Arjun in the losers bracket. I was expecting to commentate one of his games today. I just assumed it would be in the winners bracket. So that's how crazy the competition has been here.
And by crazy, you mean super incredibly strong, because look at the names that we've got up here. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, we already spoke about how he's made it to the finals. He's playing against Jan Nepomniachtchi, who's looking for that golden ticket. Vladimir Fedosiev, he's had such an incredible run through the Julius Baer Generation Cup, but lost that match yesterday. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Arjun, 10 out of 11 at the Olympiad. A gold right there. He was unstoppable. Inspiring chess. He's had an incredibly busy week, and then he marches his way into Division 1, but now he's on his last life.
Exactly right. And we've got players here that are not on their last life, of course, because we've got the winners semifinals a little bit later on this afternoon, and some very familiar names there, including Magnus Carlsen. But realistically, anybody can lose a match and drop into the lower bracket semifinals. It really is all to play for today.
You know, John, what's been awesome about this season of the Champions Chester, well, I say awesome but different, is that now Magnus, regardless of the form that he's in, he's always the favorite to win every event. But this season, he's managed to do it only once. It was the first one. It's enough to get him into that Oslo finals, but that just shows how tricky and how difficult these events are. We've got the tour standings, critical tour points on the line in this final event, qualifying event of the CCT.
So this is what we're looking at the moment. You can see the players who are competing here already have a decent chunk of change in their back pockets, right? We've got some prize money in the bag, but really we are trying to fight for a place in the finals where we can get even more. And the top couple of names you see on that list are already through to Norway. So we get to take a look at who else is going to be filling that void. There are 8 spots, 4 of which are currently filled. Although only the 4th was recently confirmed. It was the top 3 earlier this week. Let's take a look at who's already booked their ticket to Norway. Magnus, absolutely no surprise there. I mean, it's probably next door for him. Firouzja, will also be seeing him there, the only player with more points than Magnus at the moment. MVL, who we see in action today, has already booked a place, but wouldn't mind another tournament win. And Jan Pomniachi, through tour points, has managed to clinch one of those top 8 spots as well. So he's in 4th place at the moment, but nobody can touch him. He's guaranteed to be one of those top 8 spots, Tanya.
And these 2 players are playing against each other in the losers round 1 today. And that's exactly how juicy this matchup will be. A very strong fight. They've, of course, played against each other a number of times. Way too many. They're 2 titans of the chess world. And very interesting, fascinating playing styles, because when Jan and Maxime are on the board, we can expect fireworks. They do not shy away from aggressive play, going all out. It's going to be a fun match. And I think for Jan, he always keeps the clock under control. How much of that can Maxime do? Do you have a favorite in this one, John?
I've always loved the way Jan plays his games, and I really enjoy the fact that he doesn't shy away from getting into really complicated, sharp positions as well. But he also has really good deep positional understanding. He's a little bit of an all-round player who has no fear as far as I'm concerned. Like, people forget sometimes that this guy lost a world championship on tiebreaks, right? That's how close he was to being world champion. So a very, very strong player. Super keen to see him in action today. He has gotten one of those spots in Norway, though, which means there are 4 more up for grabs. So there's quite a lot riding on today and what each player has to do to clinch one of those spots in Norway. Let's go ahead and take a look, because for each player, it's a little bit different depending on the number of points they've got. Now, what we've done, Tanya, is instead of making it super complicated and having everyone, do loads of maths on stream to try and work out exactly who needs to finish where, this graphic tells us exactly where everybody needs to finish, and basically 4 of the 6 names on this list by the end of the tournament will have clinched a spot in Norway.
And Jan's been so good this season that he's already 1 tournament to spare. He's got enough tour points to make it to that season end final. And one guy who really wants to make it, well, 2 of them in our screen, but I know exactly how motivated Arjun feels for this one. He was in Delhi, he was in my city just a few days ago, and he's already flown back to Europe. He's playing a tournament. The guy is unstoppable. He just never gets tired of chess. He can play chess 30 hours a day, 400 days in a year. It's incredible to see what he can do. But he's playing against big fish. He's playing against Vladimir Fedoshev, another beast on the board when it comes to these formats. And what a run Fedoshev has had at the Olympiad, fresh from his victory against Magnus, playing for Slovenia, which came so close as well, to have a great finish in that last match. They lost, but Fedoshev very much in form, and this is going to be a big battle.
Yeah, Fedoshev, very much the talisman for the Slovenian team at the Olympiad, and has won over a lot of fans, especially with his victory over Magnus. So that was fantastic to see. We can see everyone's woken up and arrived to the board. Is it just me, Tanya, or when the players are preparing for a match, they always look bored? I never see someone like bouncing up and down, super excited, having their 9th cup of coffee. Is this like a player warming up kind of routine where you don't want to use your energy too early? Because everyone is just so chill right now.
They're definitely feeling the energy inside. I think it's part of sort of the mind games. You want to look relaxed. You want to give those vibes that you're totally under control. Your nerves are in control and you're ready to go. Now for these two, for Maxime and for Jan, the pressure is a little off because they've already made it to Oslo. They've punched that ticket. Maxime with a win in the CrunchLabs Master and Jan Nepomniachtchi with a bunch of tour points already. So I think they're going to go really all out. They're going to go for an all-risk approach in this one, which means more fun for us, John.
Yeah, that's going to be really, really good fun. But obviously we got very little on the line for both of them because they know they've punched their ticket, like you say. So I have a feeling we're going to be watching those games significantly more, at least in the next 10 to 20 minutes. But also, Fedoseev and Arjun, only one of them, I suspect, will be able to punch their ticket to Norway. So it's the opposite situation where you go from nothing on the line to everything on the line.
Absolutely. And I think we're getting moves in as well at rapid
That's right.
speed right now. And look at what we've got. We've got the Russian defense, the Petrov, a pet opening of Jan Nepomniachtchi. We've seen him employ this so many times, and definitely something that Maxime Vachier-Lagrave has prepared against. A very symmetrical start to this one so far.
Yes, indeed. And sometimes you get like D3 kicking the knight, which is a little bit more passive compared to chucking the pawn straight out to D4. But yeah, we have symmetrical pawn structures at the moment, which we can already see MVL trying to break open with that C4 push. We have had an exchange on C3, so finally we have different pawn structures. MVL now has 3 pawn islands after recapturing with the B pawn when the knight got exchanged. However, Jan now has the bishop pair already out and active on the board. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how we feel about going into the middle game here. That pin on the knight on F3 is annoying, but it's not the be-all and end-all here in White's position.
Well, I think they're still pretty much in theoretical discussions and definitely very familiar with these positions. As you mentioned, it's an open board, so bishops play a big part. Both players have it. Right now, for Jan Nepomniachtchi, he needs to still finish his development on the queen side. And this little retreating move by Maxime Vachier-Lagrave just puts the bishop in a more active square, always eyeing tactics along the diagonal. Not just that, at some point, you're also thinking about starting to expand on that center. For now, watch out, there's a threat on the b7 pawn.
And instantly playing b5 as well, so has a very useful dual purpose, right? Where it undermines White's ambitions in the center, making sure that c4 is not quite as straightforward as you otherwise would want, and then maybe asking a few long-term questions about if you do try and play c4, what are you going to do with your d4 pawn, which could become a little bit weaker. So just putting the question to MVL here to say, fine, you can try and attack on the queen side, but actually it might undermine your position elsewhere.
Well, the one drawback of a move, pawns don't move backwards, and every pawn move has its own set of consequence, and that is that the c6 pawn can be weak at times and can end up becoming a target. White already has a nice bishop that can step one square ahead and at the right time start putting pressure. Maxime's the first one to go into a bit of a think of how he wants to approach this position. He's playing with the white pieces. Also, let's remind everyone that the losers bracket, John, is a best of 2. So the margin for error is pretty much not there. With the white pieces, you want to try to create your chances. And look at that. Maxime, he's really going for it. He strikes in the center. He's trying to open the D line, but also get rid of the pawn that's defending the B5 pawn. And I think this move is perhaps going to make Jan think for a little bit. How do you respond to this?
Yeah, let me ask the question from a slightly different point of view, Tanya. I get that C6, had some potential weaknesses. I wasn't expecting an instant swap off to be beneficial for White for a couple of reasons. The first is I'm really scared of bishop h2 discovered attacks, but okay, that's a little bit of a cheap trick. But the second is you've opened up the semi-open c file against a pawn on c3, which to me looks like is a big long-term weakness for White. So why would pushing d5 so early against that c6 pawn how is that desirable for MVL? I don't fully understand, I guess, the motivations behind that.
Well, it's a great question. And I think one of the big advantages in this position that white can play against, that C3 weakness, would be the isolated queen's pawn, the one on D5. We already see that the rook is nicely placed for that. And this is the square that I wanted to highlight for that bishop. It comes onto this diagonal. Not only does it defend the C3 pawn, but it's eyeing the king side. I like how Maxime has created this dynamic in the position, but it also feels, as you pointed out, that black should have enough play. You take control of the other open file, the only other open line apart from the B1, plus you've got your queen lined up against the C3 pawn, the bishop and the queen already in a battery, the knight at the right time can jump to C4. I would say that this looks quite balanced, and Jan Nepomuceno should be happy with the opening outcome here.
Yeah, this is interesting because at first glance I can it's almost like both players are simply asking themselves straight out of a Jeremy Silman sort of technique, what squares do I want all of my pieces to be on, right? That dark squared bishop for white on D4 makes perfect sense. The black knight coming into C4 also makes perfect sense. The one question I have is the rook on B5. Like, does that feel a little bit committal to the B file? Are we just going to see that rook come back and try and swing over to the E file later on?
That's one idea, as you're pointing out, but another idea I like is to actually swing over the other rook to the B file and then try and double down, maybe push this A pawn up and get rid of the knight. The moves are coming in so fast and quick. And I just wonder if Maxime has a sneaky plan on the king side to start advancing the H pawn. He goes for the other idea that we were mentioning of doubling up on the B file. Now he's going to try and remove this knight from B6 so that you can penetrate on the 7th rank. Is A4 a move that comes to Maxime's mind? It definitely comes to my head right now.
Actually rook A5 first. So I'm guessing the idea would be A4, and if knight takes, you play a rook into B7 and really start to cause all sorts of problems, I guess.
That was the plan, to just show quickly that you really want to enter, but Maxime, he instead goes in with the rook and also eyeing the queen jumping in. We were pointing out the D5 weakness. There's another weakness which is easier for white to get to. It's harder for black to attack the A2 pawn. The queen jumping onto the square, creating threats. You have to time it well because this rook on E6 is lined up on the 6th rank. This position is getting fun. The one thing that you have to be careful about, loose pieces drop off. The rook on A5 is not defended. Is there a good knight jump? Because the A7 pawn is a target as well.
That's a good point, and that's exactly what's stopping black playing knight to c4 straight away, right? It's such a fantastic outpost, and then the rook is under attack, but unfortunately, rook takes a7 would be the counter there. It's worth reminding us, by the way, we've got 7 minutes on the clock for both players here. This is one of 2 games that are going on at the moment, so we shouldn't ignore Arjun Erigaisi versus Vladimir Fedoseev, which is happening at the same time. And luckily for us, Talia, we don't have to choose between one or the other because we have both games side by side. I'm really sorry that we're coming here as soon as the queens are getting swapped off, but still, there's gonna be a lot of fun chess both sides of the board.
I'm so glad you called this one out because it's a really important moment. We see that white has just captured the queen, and that's the right side of our board. Vladimir Fedoseev with the black pieces. He's slowed down. Now, yes, you want to pick up the queen, but what Fedoseev is thinking is of throwing in a check with that bishop on h2. Grab an extra pawn before you grab that queen on f6, which is why Fedoseev is trying to calculate what's better. Does he take immediately and gain a tempo when white recaptures that bishop on d6? Or on the other hand, does he pick up that pawn and at least at least stays a pawn up? Right now we see material is balanced, but black has got this slightly ugly pawn structure on the king side. I'm expecting him to take out the bishop and defend that pawn on f6 with that square on e6. I think this one's going to be a slow game, but I do like Arjun's position, a rook on an open file, a healthier pawn formation, the bishop coming out next, the rook joining in on the d file. Things looking good for Arjun so far.
All right, let's hop into that game and maybe take a look at the board in slightly more detail. Tanya, I'm going to have an annoying positional question for you. We saw that white chose not to take on h2, and we didn't take the extra pawn before recapturing the queen on f6. So what that tells me is that the extra tempo of having the rook out on d6 and the extra time is worth that pawn. To what extent do we agree with that? How would this have played out differently if bishop takes h2 was played? Because to a lot of club players in the chat, we would have seen you get a free pawn and the queen is going to come off the board anyway. Why not take it?
And that's a good question. And I think what Fedosiev did not like about that was that white just gets an extra tempo to improve the pieces really quickly. So for these top level players, piece activity and getting your pieces out into the game as quickly as possible is so much more important than material. And we see he's now traded out one pair of rooks to try to ease off the pressure. The king wants to come to the center of the game, and it just looks like he calculated a little bit and knew that he could hold this position. He's got enough resources to make sure that the f6 pawn doesn't come into attack. A rook exchange to follow. You want to challenge on the only open file. A rook is only as good as the file it's on. So Fedosiev definitely showing his class there of not going for what seemed the most attractive line, which would have allowed white to get more tempos and more activity and perhaps make it more difficult for black to equalize the endgame.
Interesting. And it means that white obviously has some piece activity here, but black's able to get the king into a much stronger position to start fighting towards the end game as well. Is it fair to say that Fedosiev here is basically saying, right, I need to keep hold of the tempo, I need to keep hold of the initiative so that not taking that pawn is worth it? Does that make it a little bit sharper for him?
It definitely gives him the activity that he's looking for to just make sure that things remain under control. So you're absolutely right on that. And I think the players are going to play this one out, but it feels that black is just in time to make sure that white's king isn't getting super active. Once again, it's going to take a while to put pressure on this pawn. Meanwhile, black getting the king into the game, the rook into the game. I think the fun, John, is in the Maxime versus Jan game. This is going to be an endgame where is trying to create another weakness right now. This move, I'm expecting a5 to try and get to the c5 pawn, and then the black king coming forward, asking the rook some questions. And it just feels like Fedosiev will be in time to defend it.
Yeah, once the king comes out to e7, for example, you don't really want to keep the rook on the 6 because you move rook c6 and then suddenly king d7 and your rook has completely run out of lives. So this is a lot of activity. There we go.
And now we think the rook is trapped. Bad idea.
That's what I would do in a blitzscape. Yep, bad idea. So there we go. So let's go ahead and zoom out and maybe catch up on the MVL Jan game, because like you rightly said, Tanya, there were more fireworks early on there, but at the same time, you know what? We have some pieces off the board, and it still looks really, really dynamic. But the pawn structure hasn't really changed. The bishop on d4 that we were talking about earlier is very, very much cemented on that square, right? Not going anywhere anytime soon. But that knight that was thinking about hopping into c4, it's on a5.
Yeah, there's just a lot that has happened right now. What on earth is this rook doing here? Why was it
Should
not
we go
captured?
back a few moves and take a look, maybe?
I think we have to jump in at everything that just transpired. And I'm not going to go back all the way, but we left it around here last. And just really quickly, let's get everyone up to date. The bishop fell back and we saw Maxime come in, double up on the B file. A really nice move. Rook sliding over to the A line, putting pressure, defended. The rook now doubles up on the 5th rank, and Maxime keeps improving the position of his pieces. We see that he wants to put pressure on a7. That's a beautiful maneuver by white. Just take in the way he's improved the position of those two rooks. The knight eventually jumps forward. A trade on e6, which cannot be captured because the g6 pawn is hanging. So Jan Nepomniachtchi captures the other rook. And look at that. Maxime doing Maxime things. He just ignores it. Because if black was to take this rook, then the queen jumps into g6 with a huge mating idea. Unstoppable
look at his
mating
smile.
idea. Unbelievable.
That smile he just had, Tanya. It was incredible.
That was amazing. Knight g5, and now he does bring the rook up, trying to get rid of more pieces. The rook just stays there. Maxime doesn't care about his rook. What on earth is going on here?
This is amazing stuff. I mean, Maxime is basically saying, I have a mating attack that you can't stop. I'm guessing the plan is very simply queen h4 into h7, checkmate, thank you very much. That's the game. There's no way to vacate the square immediately in front of the king on g7 because it's a doubled pawn. You've got a pawn on g6 as well. So we're saying black simply doesn't have enough time. So I guess if black takes the rook here with any piece, queen h4 is just the next move. And are we can't possibly be staring down the barrel of a two-mover here, can we?
This is insane stuff by Maxime. He says, take my rook, I'm going to take your king. Queen h4 is unstoppable, and Jan Nepomniachtchi finds the only defense. And look at that. Look at what he's doing. He wants to sacrifice his rook on every single move. That's a brilliancy. That's got to be a brilliancy. Unreal what he's doing. He's deflecting the queen. Just really quickly.
Love it.
If White had to go queen h4 here, Jan Nepomniachtchi would have given up his queen, got some material in return, and at least not get checkmate. But Maxime says, I don't care about anything but your king. He deflects the queen. If you now take the rook, queen h4, checkmate, unstoppable, thank you so much. And if you take the knight, he's just changed the plan entirely. He has pinned the bishop. The queen moves away. The rook falls.
And then you have pretty much unavoidable mate via f8. There's no defense that doesn't immediately drop the queen onto that bishop as well. So creating a second weakness there. I think we're very close to just wrapping up that victory for white here in game one.
It's over. He just resigns. There's nothing to do. You lose your king, you lose your game. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave with a power-packed attack, and this one sacrificing the rook not once, not twice, but thrice.
And this is a Petrov as well, remember? This is Jan's pet opening too. So that's a very big psychological blow in game number one, Tanya. We shouldn't overlook that.
Absolutely, and I think we've got one more game going on. We're going to jump to that. I'm still thinking about this amazing attack that was put on display by Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, wrapping it up on style. We can still see Jan Nepomniachtchi. I think he's thinking about everything that went wrong in that one. Maxime, meanwhile, has just left the screen. He's getting ready for that final round where he needs only a draw. Meanwhile, an incredibly exciting endgame on the Argent board.
Yeah, that's right. MVL off the screen. He's mic dropped. He's out of there. He's gone to top up his tea, no doubt, ahead of game number 2. And we said that this game was going to be a slow burn. I mean, look, you have got opposite colored bishops, but we've got opposite colored bishops with a lot of pawns coming down the board for white. And we've still got a pair of rooks, major pieces still in the game, which means, like, for any player, for example, who goes, oh, because the bishops are opposite color, you don't need to worry about a thing. Please be very careful, because when rooks and queens are still on the board, it's actually more dangerous more often than not. So this is a very exciting middle game that we're seeing here.
So white has an extra pawn, right? But black has got so much counterplay. I see the evaluation bar. It really likes Argent's position, and I get that. But look at what Fedosiev is doing. He's making this practically really difficult. Ignore that question mark. The king wants to come in, try to assist this c-pawn going up the board. Yes, white has an extra pawn, but it's still far away from actually creating a passer. I think this is far from over, John.
Yeah, this looks like it's a... To me, it feels like it's a decent practical move. The blue arrow, of course, the computer-assisted, we recommend doing this, has shown a rook going to the d-file for both players on consecutive moves, Tanya. But the reality is, king a4 is a really good practical shot. The idea is simply to get the king into b3 and push the pawn to c3. And if you can assist that pawn past that long diagonal where that dark squared bishop for white is doing such a good job of defending, you're trying to engineer a situation where white is forced to give up a bishop, for example, to stop a pawn from queening. This is far from simple for Argent to convert.
I'm with you on this. And now just under the 3-minute mark, this is going to be a very exciting endgame. And once again, you know, it's the kind of position where you really, and look at that, this is what we mean. One inaccuracy and the eval bar comes down, because it's so difficult to be accurate in these kind of positions where you know the danger exists. It's basically a battle of two cities where Fedosiev is playing on the queen side and Arjun is trying to create a passer on the right side, on the king side. Now, it appears that this move, it's a bit slow. Is it time for Fedosiev to just come in with the king? Let's point out that at least for now, the c3 square is guarded thrice by white, so black still needs to get one more defender to push that pawn successfully forward.
Maybe that's the logic by which, look, Arjun instantly plays f5 after the king comes in. Maybe that's the logic Arjun is relying on to say, without that one more attacker, we think that's fine. But it's interesting how both players are psychologically ignoring the D file, right? Because yes, we've seen what the computer recommends, but ultimately Arjun's saying, I don't need to worry about the D file here. I should be able to push ahead and try and break something apart. Whereas Vladimir's also saying, I don't need to worry about the D file. Oh, hello.
Whoa.
Rook's just come off the board.
He's going all out. And I love what he's done. He's gotten rid of a key piece. And now it's all about who's faster. It's a race. It's fast and furious. And it looks scary for white. Because this bishop does a beautiful job of guarding the pawn. Can you go e6?
Rook
Because
G2?
if black was to take, it's on the board. If you take the pawn, white simply advances the other pawn forward. What is the move here?
That's incredible. Arjun finding the continuation to say, look, I get that you have the option to queen, but I'm going to sack the rook for that and guarantee that I can promote myself. So far from straightforward.
Sure.
Fedoseev also down to 30 seconds on the clock.
John, this is incredible. If you queen, white simply snaps up the queen. Yes, you give up the rook.
Makes
and once
sense.
this pawn moves to e7, there's no stopping it from queening, which is why the computer points out the best move, and Vladimir Fedoseev finds it. You want your bishop on the square to guard the queening square before you push your own pawn. If white was to take on f7, thank you very much. The bishop just goes back, and black goes on to queen. Bishop to b3. What a classy move by Fedoseev.
That's so cool. And I should point out, by the way, I was doing commentary at the Olympiad, as a lot of people in chat will know. After making, a really classy move, I usually had about 10 minutes to appreciate and just understand how good that move was. I feel like I've got about 5 seconds if I'm lucky on this broadcast. So this is insane so far. I'm trying to find the time to just appreciate these things. But that beautiful bishop subtlety from Fedoseev just keeps the balance in this position and is keeping us all guessing as well.
John, this is incredible stuff because once again, the idea is to fall back to this diagonal when needed or stay on this one as needed because Fedoseev has to make sure that Arjun isn't able to create a passer. Meanwhile, he also has ideas of advancing his own B pawn further. And Arjun, he goes back to e3, which was a mistake for some reason. But Fedoseev, he doesn't have time to find out why, and neither do we because he continues to repeat.
Yeah, I'm almost certain b3 was the move there, right? Because you still have bishop b5 if you wanted to do that. So I feel like if black wanted to make progress, b3 was
now
absolutely...
Now you go f7 and he wants to go e5. Look at those tactics on the board. And is this what Arjun missed? Because you don't have time to push the f-pawn. e5 comes in with a check. Yes, you take it, but then you lose the gem and glory of your position. And the black pawns are unstoppable.
And remember the psychology of this as well, Tanya. Fedoseev sacked the rook to get to this position, so he must have felt really confident about his winning chances, and now he's the one fighting for the draw as well. So this is incredible. Actually, like black, I feel like if you can get b3 on the board, I'm trying to figure out how you can stop black from winning this game. I don't think I have an answer.
I'm not sure if an answer exists here. And I don't think Arjun's sure because look at this. He slows down and I'm going to try and check out what's going on the camera.
Oh,
This is looking tough. You're winning. You have everything under control. And exactly like you said, to shift the dynamics with that exchange sacrifice on this square, that was the game changer. And there were ways for Arjun to keep it equal, to hold the game, but so difficult to adapt to this different circumstance. And now it just looks like he's missed this resource of e5. And is this just completely busted for white now?
It might be because like under normal circumstances, if you just look at the motif on that side of the board, you go, yes, okay, that bishop's annoying, but it's fine because I've got rook g7 and I can just push f7 and you sack the bishop. No, you don't because there's a pawn on c2 waiting to queen. So Arjun does not have that luxury. And now we've got a passed f pawn, by the way, ahead of a white. Like ahead of a pawn of the opposite color is so weird to see in a game of chess, but that's exactly what we have here. And I don't think Arjun has an easy way to stop both.
I don't think there's a hard way to stop both. I think this is just over because Black's going to get that king out of the pin, queen this pawn, and there's no way to actually stop the f pawn from queening. Meanwhile, Black bishop doing a beautiful job of making sure that the f pawn remains under control. And to add to all of that, the cherry on the cake for Fedosiev is that the h pawn is off the right color. So even if things were to go wrong, which they won't because Fedosiev will queen, Black is just too fast in this game.
Wow, so we have a win with the black pieces here for Vladimir Fedosiev. I mean, look, Fedosiev was the giant killer in the Olympiad, right? He defeated Magnus. He stopped the strongest player in the world in his tracks, and he managed to grind that one out. What I will say, though, is that Arjun had chances in that game, that the eval bar was going crazy at one point. It was winning for white, it was winning for black, it was in the middle for a lot of it. There were so many difficult subtleties that these players had to calculate with literally seconds on the clock, but that's a big win for Fedosiev, a win with the black pieces in game number 1.
So impressive by Fedosiev, under pressure, finding that resource and taking that early match lead. And as you said, with the black pieces, now he needs only to draw in the next game to advance through into the bracket, and he's got the white pieces. But let me tell you one thing about John. When you're playing against Arjun, he doesn't care about the color. He plays the black pieces like he's playing with white. He's going to try to create those dynamics. He's going to try to create an imbalanced position. But the big fish has shown that he's ready for a big fight, and he's ready to fight all those big moves today.
It's really interesting seeing their facial expressions because you're absolutely right, Tanya. Fedosiev, you could tell he's like getting himself, worked up. You can see he's here, he's ready to play. And then the camera swaps to Arjun, and I'm like, Arjun is one of the most stoic faces I think I've seen in a long time, including at the Olympiad, where I can't actually figure out if he's thinking positive, negative thoughts, what his strategy's going to be. It's like he has the same game face on, and it's so hard to read him.
Well, Arjun's a really positive guy, and I think he's always ready for a fight. He knows what he needs to do in the next round. It's not going to be easy because Fedosiev coming in on his A form, and meanwhile, it's also the same storyline for Jan Nepomuchy, who needs to win on demand, but he will have the white pieces. But I have to say, the game that Maxime played, coming out of a Petrov to just outplay Jan like that, to checkmate him on the board like that, the way he did, that was insane stuff.
And that was a big statement as well to Jan to basically say, look, I will come out in an opening that is your pet opening effectively. And in 25, 30 moves, show you that this is completely busted. It was absolutely incredible. Let's take a look at what that means for the bracket as it currently stands. So here at the Julius Baer Generation Cup, there we go. You can see on your screens, we are covering the losers round 1 at the moment. I did say quarterfinals beforehand. My apologies for that. But anyway, zooming in. So MVL 1-0 up. Vladimir Fedosiev 1-0 up. And I believe we have Jan Nepomniachtchi with the white pieces in game number 2. But we have Vladimir Fedosiev with the white pieces in game number 2. And for me, this is where it's really interesting. Arjun has to win on demand, Tanya, with the black pieces, and we know he's capable of some really, really cool drawn out, deep positional understanding, but he will absolutely bring out the deep tactics if he has to. I think he has to do that here. I don't feel like there's much of an alternative.
I think it's also so much about this one for Arjun, about his mental fortitude, because he was so in control in that game 1. But just to forget that, and once again, I think the star move for Fedosiev was at the right time, changing the dynamics, sacrificing his rook for that monster bishop, and then just steamrolling those pawns across. Arjun needs to forget the advantage that he had in game 1. He needs to go with the same mindset because he did everything right. It was those critical last few seconds. To be accurate is never easy. He played a great game. And I think from that perspective, it's perhaps slightly more difficult for Jan Nepomniachtchi to make a comeback because it just felt like he never got a game. And John, I'm going to put you on the spot. If you had to predict one of these 2 matches going into an Armageddon, which one would it be?
Oh, that's a horrible question to ask because like the one I think will go to Armageddon is different from the one I want to go to Armageddon, which is fun. But I think we are going to see, I genuinely think we're going to see MVL Jan go to Armageddon because I think that we can have Jan with the white pieces when it matters. He's comfortable with being in those sort of crunch situations, and he's got so much experience as a player. I think that's more likely to go to an Armageddon because I feel like if Fedoseyev's job is to just hold a draw with the white pieces, especially given his current form, I think he's more likely to do that.
That's a fair analysis. I would love to see two Armageddons. I want to see the matches go down to the wire, and I would love to see Arjun make a comeback as well, because it was such a close game one. But for these two players, Jan Nepomniachtchi definitely has to forget what happened in game one. That looked like absolute destruction from the Frenchman with three names. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave needs only a draw in the next game. He will play with the black pieces. What kind of an opening approach are we expecting from this one by Jan?
Oh, goodness. I love the smiles as well. We're going to have to be thinking up something really quite fun, aren't we? We're going to need to go... I don't think we have to go anything crazy offbeat. We're not going to see like an unbelievably staggering move 2 or something, but we're looking to find something that's both aggressive and sharp as quickly as possible to maybe force MVL to go into the mid game lower on time and to try and get him to think earlier on, because I think the goal is not to out-theory someone. The goal is to try and get them to make a mistake under time pressure.
Well, if MVL was an E5 player, I would wonder if Jan would go for the King's Gambit, E4 on the board, and Maxime goes for his pet. A knight off is what I'm expecting. It is on the board, so we can expect a fun fight in this one as well. I was going to say that, could that be a King's Gambit? But of course, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave with the Sicilian coming in. And we see once again players, they are in their preparation right now, attacking the B2 pawn, getting that queen out, which is defended with the knight falling back. Very often we get positions with opposite side castling in these positions, which make it even more fun. And I think Jan's move of pushing that F pawn forward implies that that's exactly where we're headed, John.
Exactly right. I feel like that was the statement of intent. As soon as I saw the pawn go up to f4, the queen's on b6 at the moment. Oh, you can't castle through a check, so kingside castling is not on. And Jan says, absolutely no problem at all. I'm going queenside, mate. So enjoy. And we've got pawn storms on both sides of the board. Yes, this game could end in a draw, but it's not that likely right now. We're trying to provoke a mistake. Remember, this is at a shorter time control as well. This is not super theoretical classical chess, or it won't be in another 5 or 10 moves. We are going to get some very, very sharp chess on this board in just a minute's time. I feel like we just have to stick here for a while. It's a little bit ahead of the Arjun Vladimir game as well, Tanya. So I think maybe we can stay with this game until it simmers down a little bit, if that's even possible, before taking a look at the other. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. And now this is the first time that Maxime has slowed down, which means this last move has taken him by surprise. And he does attack the bishop. Now, like you said, the reason we're expecting a sharp fight is because it's going to be a race to each other's king. White at some point wants to start pushing the g-pawn. Meanwhile, Maxime will have ideas of pushing the b-pawn. What on earth is going on? A piece sacrifice already on the board. He says, I'm not retreating my bishop. None of the defensive chess. He's just hanging a piece. And it's all because Jan Nepomniachtchi wants to open up the H line. And if Black would have accepted that sack, after taking it would have been all hell breaks loose. And I think Maxime knows the dangers in that position. He continues to develop, instead trying to put his king to safety.
Wow, absolutely love that. It's interesting that the dark squared bishop then, after offering itself up as a sacrifice, Tanya, then proceeds to take on f6. Is that live on the board now?
It is. It's taken on f6. And the reason for that is that you could not have waited one more move, because after this move of bishop to b7, Maxime is ready to go long castle. So in fact, he could have picked up the bishop on the next move and then brought his king to safety. So Jan does trade on f6. Maxime recaptures with the knight, putting pressure on the central pawns, and the king sidesteps any fire down on the C line. And this is the current position. H5 played, so for now, blocking any attack on the king side. The players are playing so quickly, so clearly they know what they're doing. But to me, it looks like the way Maxime has stopped any pawn storm on the king side, that's got to favor black in the position.
Yeah, so actually castling into the king side now after playing h5 and blunting that momentum, to me, this actually looks easier for black to play, because if I'm black right now, I'm going, I can see a lovely hole on g4 for my knight, which sort of stops white's pawn storms, or at the very least, it makes them significantly slower to play. And black can bring both rooks over to the A and B file. B4 is basically on whenever black chooses to play it right now. So to me, it feels like this position is much, much easier to play for MVL than it is for Jan, because allowing the diffusal of tension there with bishop takes knight on f6 has suddenly given black so much freedom. There's no pressing need to defend move by move anymore on the king side.
Maxime just understands these knight-off positions so incredibly well, which also is Jan Nepomucci's one of his favorite openings with black. So both players have immense understanding. I just want to back up really quickly now that the players have slowed down to this big moment when Jan's bishop on g5 was attacked. And at this moment, if black, instead of developing the bishop to b7, had actually captured just the kind of dangers that exist of opening up the h file. You can't run away with the knight because the rook is hanging. It's a bit of a face-off. And let's say you trade on the h line and then fall back with your knight. The rook can jump in, and it just looks like so much trouble for black. The only way to defend the knight is to get your king all the way to f8 to protect it. But it's not going to be enough because white can get more firepower into the attack, just opening up the bishop diagonal. And after bishop to h7, it's pretty much game over. So these are ideas that both players were very familiar of, which is why instead of going into this line, Maxime decided to develop his pieces and the board as we have it right now, the live position. This is what it is. As we were pointing out, so difficult for white to create open files, open lines against that black king.
No, you're absolutely right. I was looking at the analysis board and that white rook on h8. I've played Among Us. I know an imposter when I see one, and that is not a fun one to play against at all. So needing to find some alternate ideas here. We do see the board opening up a little bit, and I guess this is what Jan wants as well, because if the pawn storm has been blunted and if the knight can come into g4 at any time, great. Give us some more lines. Give us some more avenues of attack. Give us some more possibilities of trying to develop our pieces onto squares where we can make interesting things happen. But the reality is, just having that b1 to h7 diagonal, to me, it doesn't feel like it's enough, because if you recapture with the pawn, you've got a white pawn sat there blocking your own attack, and then I can still come into g4 and have a field day if it wants to. So for anything to work here, you're going to have to be very confident you can push f6 and sack the pawn for additional attack. And I feel like time might be running out here for white to make this work.
I'm with you on this, because your own pawns are coming in the way of your pieces. There's really no way to open up the G line easily. Black doesn't even need to move this knight away. And look at black's flexibility. For Maxime, the attack just flows. He can already think about giving up that pawn, because if you take it, thank you very much. The bishop simply jumps out of the way. The rook re-grabs that pawn, and then there is an open line to get to white's king. I think for the second time today, Jan Nepomucci's king is under fire.
Now, I'm looking for... I
believe you do have a move, and b4 has been played, John. So
there we go. We were wondering when
it
was going to happen. So b4 being played now, and the obvious question, Tanya, is can we get away with taking that pawn? Obviously, at first glance, there are moves like knight to a2 to allow you to play c3, but you don't really, in a position like this, want to be playing your knight back into a corner, even like for the sake of a pawn when a5 is going to be coming as well. It feels like there's all sorts of tactics for black in those positions.
And let's show your idea. You might think that you're very safe by pushing the B pawn, but as you pointed out, there's a second A pawn that can start moving up the board, causing all kinds of problems. So The king is really not safe in this line either. b4 asking questions, and we've got moves because white decided eventually to grab on b4. Nothing better to be done. Maxime's bishop steps out of the way. The rook picks up the pawn on b4, and yes, your g file is open now, but it's not enough because black has got enough pieces. Well, it just needs one to defend that g7 pawn. And look at the timing of it all, John. You bring your rook into the attack, and you also vacate a lovely square for the bishop to fall into defense to the black king.
I was looking at moves here like rook takes pawn check for white to see if I can bring a queen into g5 and get away with some sort of perpetual or something. There's nothing. I was looking as hard as I could, but I couldn't see anything, Tanya. This is looking really quite difficult here. And I think considering that, like, you know, that piece got taken, that pawn got taken, it felt like there was nothing better to do here for Jan. I was a little bit surprised. I wanted to see him push as hard as he could for a very big resounding victory with the white pieces, but at the moment, it looks like MVL might be sweeping this 2-0.
It really does look like that. The first one as well, the attack, the way he carried it out was absolutely flawless. You know, finding the right sacrifice at the right time, giving up his rook so many times on the board, and then finally, my rook in such a way that you can't even capture it. And right now, those rooks are once again lined up against that white king. I can smell tactics on this, and I'm sure I can only smell it, but Maxime Vachier-Lagrave sees it. What's going to happen next? I think it's disaster for white.
Oh,
John, did you just see that? We just had a fourth rook sacrifice by Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Unbelievable.
Oh, he absolutely doesn't hold back.
He's just obliterated white's pawns in front of the king. The queen is lined up. There has to be a big check on the board. Queen, knight, and the rook against the king. It feels like there has to be a blowout in this position.
Yes.
And the bishop joins in as well.
Oh, not even a double check. I was looking at knight a2, knight e2 double checks. Nah, why do that when you can absolutely pile in? So after a double check on the knight, you can now be playing rook b2 or something like that. And unfortunately, Jan here is completely on the ropes. The other game is going, but I'd like to stay on this board at least for another 30 seconds in case it's over that quickly, Tanya. This is lovely stuff. MVL continues to crank up the pressure as well. There might have been a killing blow on the previous move, but why not put it completely beyond doubt? This is ruthless chess.
I couldn't agree more with you. Maybe the computer had something stronger, but these are the kind of moves that destroy you on a chessboard because it's a quiet move, but it keeps all the threats. It only adds to the firepower. It only makes things more difficult. Jan Nepomniachtchi, he tries to block the C line by putting a knight there, and now Maxime gets another, adds more fuel to the fire with a D pawn. C4 is hanging. Jan Nepomniachtchi coming in with the last threat on the board. Queen to h6. I don't think you should rush with this because queen takes bishop would threaten a checkmate. So there has to be a move to simply try and defend that bishop on e7. And white's king absolutely naked, nothing defending it. This is going to end badly. I like how Maxime slowed down because he just needs to make one defensive move right now.
So I want to give some credit where it's due. The fact that Jan was able to play this queen h6 move to really get into a position where it's still possible for MVL to go wrong, absolutely hats off. Like, this position looks, and technically still is, completely busted for white, but finding every possible complication to challenge your opponent at every moment is exactly why players like these are super grandmasters. So absolutely amazing resource there for you. Let's see now if MVL is able to close it out.
Well, he's calculating. Maxime's a beast when it comes to calculation. He's trying to find a direct way to checkmate because once the queen leaves this diagonal, it also allows the black queen to come in with check. What's going on in Maxime's mind right now is, can he win directly? Is there, let's say, a mate in 5 or a mate in 6 after you take the bishop and the black queen comes in with the check, and he's calculated it, and John, he's found it. Queen f4 check. And now I think you just take the bishop with a check as well. The king is out in the open. Maxime busting out his moves because he's busted out all the rhymes. He knows this is ending in checkmate.
Wow, this is absolutely beautiful stuff. Taking a minute or two just to completely calculate absolutely everything he needs to. And MVL here looking like he's about to close us out. Tanya, that was a really great bit of chess from both players, but honestly, a fantastic bit of calculation as well from MVL. Look at how quickly the moves are being played out on the board. This is instantaneous now.
He doesn't even need to checkmate. He just repeats because it's good enough to get the match.
Oh no, I wanted to see the win. Come on.
We did see the bar said that there was a win, but a draw is as good as a win.
That is as good as a win, to be fair, because you are able to progress in the competition. But I was, would we like to have a quick look at, you know what? Let's go to the other game first, because the other game is live. I wouldn't mind at the end coming back to this board and having a quick look at what the finish would have looked like. Let's take a look at Arjun and Vladimir in their game, because it's been taking a while. Obviously, we've now managed to get onto both boards. Just a reminder to all of you, Vladimir Fedoseev has the white pieces and only needs to draw to progress at the expense of Arjun Erigaisi. And right now, at least as far as the eval bar is concerned, it looks like it really enjoys white's position. But from a practical point of view, Tanya, this looks complicated as hell.
I told you, it doesn't matter if Arjun's white or black, he will find a way to create the dynamics. And once again, it's the kind of position that, you know, the eval bar says that white is doing well, but white does need to be a little precise. That said, one can feel the disharmony in Arjun's board, because look how the rook and queen is on one side, while the majority of the pieces are on the other side. So while he's managed to create a very imbalanced position, it just feels like the pieces are lacking coordination. For Fedoseev, everything is on the center of the board. You're nicely developed. The king is really safe. So I think Arjun did try to push for a position where he can play for a win, because that was the need of the hour. But it's going really well for Fedoseev so far.
Yeah, like if I'm playing white in this position, I'm looking at things like bringing a knight into e4 so that I can get the rook onto c1 and start pushing on the c and d files, for example. There are things you could do with the light squared bishop coming back to f5 if you had to swap. Like, there are so many ideas for white that seem really natural to play. And if I'm playing black right now and I'm looking for the natural ideas to play, I'm like, can you please give me 10 minutes and a couple of energy drinks, because I think that's what it would take for me to find a clear plan.
It's really not easy, because what you want is your queen on the other side of the board, but there's no clear path for the queen to join the attack. Yes, you can jump in with your knight to a beautiful spot on g3 and say, you know what, you trade, I pick it up with my h-pawn, and I'm looking at ideas of sacrificing on h3. And I think these are the plans that are going on in Arjun's mind right now, because it is a must-win game for him. For now, he sidesteps with the king. Again, I feel like this is a cross that you can just ignore at the moment. The king wants to step onto g7, trying to get rid of that bishop. The whole idea revolves around trying to get this queen and rook into the game. You know, we've pointed out a lot of things that white and black want, but the one thing that we missed out was that the reason that Arjun's queen and rook are on the left side of the board is because you need to defend that a4 pawn, which surprisingly has become a bit of a weakness. Also, let's point out bishop to b3, always a threat that you need to watch out for.
Oh yes, that's a good point. So black has a couple of counter punches in this position as well. In fact, I'm guessing white's playing like it's not actually much of a problem, because what happens if black does want to get bishop b3 in?
And I think let's just show that what would have happened on the last move. And John, to me, it looks like that the bishop is needed to defend this king. You really can't pick up this rook and give up your key defender. For example, if you step in with the bishop, you attack the queen, and white could jump in to e4 to a central square. I also like the f5 square. And let's say you get greedy by picking up the rook on d1. You don't even care. You pick this up, and now this bishop is such a monster. There are ideas of the queen jumping onto f5, pawn moving on to e6. You've allowed white all the chances. You've got no coordination as black in your pieces, and all these threats are too difficult to handle. So I really think that that bishop is needed as a key defender in Arjun's position, exactly where it is. He knows it. He sidesteps with the king first. The queen gets centralized, and this is our live board.
So I love that explanation as well, because it shows maybe some of the players in the chat who might have been looking at it well, can't your rook just get captured? Yes, it can, and this is not a one-move advantage thing. This is a getting the bishop long-term onto g6, slowly cranking up the position, allowing e6, because the bishop's not on it anymore. It's a combination of a lot of different small positional things that makes it such a fatal move. So absolutely love that, Tanya. Wait, hang on a second. The bishop vacating that square anyway and allowing e6? Hello? We just talked about this. We can't do that.
But the thing that Arjun did very smartly was he moved away from this strong diagonal and kicked this bishop out of the g6 square, compared this bishop here to here. So there has been a lot of changes, and Arjun doesn't pick up that rook. He keeps the bishop on b3, but he's managed to improve the position of his pieces meanwhile. This is a crazy position that we have on the board. I'm trying to do the math. The position, the material is balanced. But black already has a pawn on g3, the white bishop doing a key role of defending the pawn on h3. Now moves like e6 don't really get you anywhere because the knight says thank you very much and comes into the game. And look at this, Fedosiev, he's trying to break where his own king is. He's trying to open up the position, get rid of this g5 pawn so that he can capture the f4 pawn. But our computer helps out. Arjun can ignore it. He gets more firepower into the attack. He doubles up on the h5. Don't take it. That's a checkmate in one.
Wow, I absolutely love that. Because in order to play that rook move doubling up, you would first have to calculate h5. Because if white wants to stop that, obviously you want to try and block it to begin with. And h5 seems like a very natural response to that. But I'm guessing there are some horrible moves where if black can get the queen into the attack, you can actually like sack one of the rooks for that pawn and just swing across the h-file anyway, because that pawn on g3 stops the king from going anywhere.
Absolutely. Really nicely pointed out that pawn looks safe, but it's only temporarily. So that's not what is on Fedosiev's mind. He attacks the knight, but this gives Arjun a really nice square on d6. But Arjun has other plans, really creative stuff. He falls back with the knight to d8 instead, putting pressure on e6. And I think it was against the idea of any trade of queens from e5. We see the players are now on blitz mode, both players under 2.5 minutes in an extremely complicated position. Inaccuracies from both sides, but that's what happens in these kind of positions where the king is under fire, and that's where you try and make your points. The knight jumps in, the bishop's hanging. Arjun might be forced to trade off this knight because, John, you can't allow this knight to live on for too long.
This is absolutely huge. Forget the eval bar, just how complicated the position is continuing to stay is incredible here.
Are we going to see another rucksack?
We must. We have to. I mean, I feel like it would be against our religion not to see one at this point. This is unreal. And the computer's even pointing out the move for us. This is incredible.
It has to be rook takes pawn. And you don't have time because the e-pawn's coming for you. Now, the only defensive resource that Fedosiev has is that after he captures the rook with the knight, the bishop does fall back. It blocks the check. What does Arjun have in mind in that position? He's slowed down. He's under a minute. He's calculating the line after rook takes pawn. It's not clear at all. How does black continue once the bishop blocks the check?
And I don't feel like it's too cheating here to say because the eval bars got into the middle, that to me suggests that there's a perpetual somewhere there. And I'm actually trying to figure out where it is and I can't see it immediately. But yeah, with the rucksack, this is, there's so much on the line. 20 seconds left for Arjun now as well. Time pressure really beginning.
Whoa!
Wait, what? No rucksack.
Wait, what is an appropriate reaction?
Instantly found as well. Queen e5 on the board. Suddenly, Fedosiev is now staring down the barrel of 2 wins as white. Have we given a lifeline here? I thought we might have been able to scramble away, but no, it now looks like a white victory. That said, think about how complicated everything is. Think about the threat of h4 still hanging. It can happen at any time. This game, even though Fedosiev is now looking to put the pressure back on, it is far from over.
And look at that. Another mistake we've got. Arjun has to find this move in 10 seconds. He has to come back with the queen. It's the best move. It's the only move, and he finds it.
Queens get traded.
John, what is going on
that
here?
was the tactic. Okay, so the knight was able to stop rook takes bishop, and for that reason, you can't just sacrifice the rook and get checkmate. I get that, but what's the follow-up?
And now if you were to take
can't you just play rook takes bishop now?
The king comes to g2 and the knight from f3 is stopping the h2 check. That's what Fedosiev is relying on, and let Arjun just rush this.
1
This is
minute,
crazy.
30
The
seconds
knight is
plays
hanging.
8 seconds. 8 seconds for Arjun.
8 seconds for Arjun, and it's still a position for all 3 results, but for Arjun, only 1 works. And let's do a quick material count, because white has an extra exchange at this point, but black has got 1 pawn for that exchange, and these 2 pawns look super menacing right now.
The white king is very boxed in,
Very
but it's boxed in
professional.
by your own pieces to an extent, and maybe that's why we've just given that back up. I feel like the position is starting to resolve itself. Are we maybe getting into a situation where Fedosiev was really pushing for the victory, all sorts of fantastic things on the board, crazy complicated tactics, but at the end of it all, Tanya, I think maybe we were in a position where I think it's fair to say Vladimir now is thinking, okay, if I'm able to draw this, that's acceptable.
It's more than acceptable. It gets him the match win. It's what he needs. And I really like that he gave back the material to neutralize all the pressure that Arjun was putting. You said it. The king was boxed up by its own pieces. He says, you know what? I'm up in exchange for a pawn. I'll give my exchange back, win that critical pawn, and with that, simplify the position further. And this one keeps getting more and more simple. Arjun will win the g5 pawn, or he might go for a check and try to create some chances by getting the b2 pawn, but I don't see that as a reality. And look at that, 1 by 1, the position just gets completely neutralized.
Yeah, rook and 2 plays rook and 2, and unfortunately this position, well, you're now playing for 2 results, right? White has the extra pawn. It shouldn't matter. This should be a complete dead draw, and if we're trying to figure out how much of a dead draw it is, I think 8 times out of 10 I could probably draw from this position, and I am nowhere close to the level these folks are. So that was incredible. Vladimir Fedosiev knocking out Arjun Erigaisi from the Julius Baer Generation Cup. That is a huge result.
And to absolute roller coaster of games, both these players ice cold with their nerves, finding those critical resources, being so precise. Incredible play by both of them, but Fedosiev, he kept his cool. He was able to just neutralize all the pressure, and he goes through, and as does Maxime Vachier-Lagrave.
So that means Jan Nepomniachtchi and Arjun Erigaisi are both out of the Julius Baer Generation Cup. It also means, I believe, that Arjun Erigaisi cannot now make it to Norway. I think Fedosiev still can still make it to Norway if he finishes in the top 4 here, but that's not guaranteed either. So a lot to play for there. MVL, of course, already there. Jan Nepomniachtchi, even though he was eliminated from today's event, should already be in Norway. But we say goodbye to Arjun. That's heartbreaking.
It is a little bit, but I think this match deservedly goes to Fedosiev. You know, in the first round, he was under pressure. He finds the right resources, and then when Arjun had that slight collapse, he was able to convert that into the full point. And the second match, Arjun really went for it with the black pieces, but Fedosiev, once again finding all those critical resources, neutralized it. And Maxime, I mean, that was just a power performance by Maxime against Jan. Jan never got going in that match, in the first game and in the second one as well, with the white pieces. It was always Jan's king that was under fire.
So here you can see what the state of the losers bracket looks like. MVL will progress, Vladimir Fedosiev will progress, and they await their opponents who will drop in from the winners bracket. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Later on this afternoon, you're going to see Levon Aronian take on Magnus Carlsen. That is a fantastic match, but equally fantastic is Alireza Firouzja taking on Alexander Grischuk. 2 absolutely titanic matches, Tanya, and let's not forget, those are best of 4 as opposed to best of 2, so plenty of fireworks on both sides of that bracket.
And Grischuk and Levon, they have to be super motivated for what's coming up because there's definitely more at stake for these two players. Magnus, Alireza already booked their spot into Oslo, but they're looking for a tournament victory. It doesn't matter whether they've already gone through to Oslo. We know Magnus, we know Alireza, they want to win the whole thing. But for Levon and Grischuk, this is their chance. This is their moment. It has to happen at the Julius Baer Generation Cup, and they've got big titans that they're facing in the next one.
So we've just concluded the lower bracket matches for today. You saw some pretty magical chess being played on the board in both of those matches. You now have an opportunity to play a little bit of that yourself. And we're specifically, of course, talking about AnyChess. It's a free-to-play magical chess game bringing you a totally new way to play chess. It is an invite-only alpha going on right now, and it is a player-versus-player experience. That's going to be coming soon. Go to go.chess.com/AnyChess or simply type !AnyChess in chat and use the code CCT, that's CCT capital letters, for Champions Chess Tour to accept the challenge. Best of luck and hope you enjoy as much as we do as well. We're going to take a quick break now, but coming up, we've got the winners semifinals here at the Julius Baer Generation Cup.
It's edited. I think it's edited.
Yeah, it's clearly.
But it's close to how it was, but it's a little bit edited. Yeah.
Not a little bit. It's completely edited.
No, but it really was like that. Yeah. Like the Eval bar in Hikaru's videos. Yeah. Right? Edited. Edited afterwards by the editor. Not how it really happened. Afterwards, taken from somewhere else and placed in the middle. And then squeezed.
You know, before this, I thought I would be the one getting into trouble. Now I think it's you.
Lawyered. Okay.
As VD, I would play rook e8, bishop c3, queen h4, queen b2, queen h5, and then bishop e2, queen g5, bishop f1, bishop f7, h4.
Better than Hikaru's lines. Better than those lines that Hikaru rattles out.
Hikaru learned from somewhere.
Yeah, because Hikaru likes that thing.
Hikaru was in Norway. This was
yeah, but Hikaru's was like completely off. Like I checked it afterwards with the engine. The line makes no sense at all.
Firouzja,
yeah, it makes no sense at all, that line.
I think only the head bob was missing here. Like Hikaru was doing this.
Ah, true. Wow.
That's a good one. We have to watch again.
No, this is a good one, yes.
It's a really good one.
Yeah, some good editing there. Wow.
Nice.
Ooh, slick. Okay.
Nice.
Oof, awkward. Yeah, this whole thing is like
but I think
it's embarrassing when you play candidates and you
he does it on, like, you know, he knows the content game. So it's not like Hikaru doesn't know the spelling of Nepo.
Step beyond tradition with a drop of magic. Clash in epic battles where magic reshapes strategy. Unleash spells to transform the game. Attack! Defend! Trick! Master them all! Ready to duel in the realm of magic?
everybody. Are you looking to play chess and meet new people in your community? Enter Meetup, the platform for hosting and organizing community events. And of course, chess is very much a part of that. Connect with your local chess community or start events like chess nights or tournaments in the park. Plus, you get to explore local community groups for any of your other hobbies on Meetup. If this sounds interesting to you, use !Meetup in chat or visit go.chess.com/meetup to find your newest checkmates. Oh, I see what you guys did there. I appreciate that. Love a good pun. I have yet to be overexposed to Danya. I've got Tanya instead with me today. And we are in the middle of a very exciting chess meetup ourselves because we're about to go into the winners bracket semis here at the Julius Baer Generation Cup. And already, Tanya, so much action in the first 2 sets of games.
And to think that's just the appetizer and the main course is coming in. We had fireworks on the board in both the matches. And John, what chess we saw from actually all 4 players. But I have to say that Jan Nepomniachtchi, he's playing another over-the-board tournament, so perhaps fatigue could have been a factor for him, where in fact he's playing really well. But today was Maxime Vachier-Lagrave's day in his match against Jan. The second round, he could have won as well, but a draw was good enough. Meanwhile, Fedosiev, that was an absolute roller coaster. Such a topsy-turvy match, John. Exciting fireworks, and Fedosiev comes on top.
I think topsy-turvy is absolutely the way I would describe it. Both players looked like they were up and down at various points, but you're right, Fedosiev advances. And of course, his prize will be to play next against either Firouzja or Grischuk, which is going to be rough. And then we've also got Aronian and Carlsen. This is absolutely gargantuan for Aronian. He has to find a way to overcome Magnus, who of course has already booked his ticket to Norway. So, Tanya, this is a very, very important matchup. Specifically for Levon, Aronian, and then later on for Grischuk as well.
Well, Magnus Levon have had their meetup about 1 million times over the chessboard. The two know each other so extremely well. It is truly the clash of the titans in that one. But Magnus has to be a huge favorite. Although I have to say that Levon, he's really found his form over the last few months. He had a brilliant performance at the Olympiad, a slightly shaky start, but the team, USA, got a silver medal. Levon won a silver medal on his board. And it was Garry Kasparov, the great Gary, who said that the chess world is a better place when Levon's playing well. So it's not going to be all easy for Magnus Carlsen today. And Alireza versus Grischuk, that is a clash of generations, but maybe not that much of styles, because we know both these players like to play aggressive chess.
So the players who already have their spots booked in Norway include the following. Magnus Carlsen, of course, won the CrunchLabs Masters earlier this year. And Alireza Firouzja followed up by winning the Chess.com Classic. Joining them was MVL, who we just saw play, who is the winner of the CrunchLabs Masters. And through tour points, we have Jan Nepomniachtchi already qualified. So even though we saw him bow out of the tournament at this stage, he has booked his place in the finals. However, there are still plenty of opportunities for players to make it in order to avoid elimination from the Champions Chess Tour finals. Arjun Erigaisa needs second place. We now know that's not going to happen, unfortunately. And then we've got plenty on the line for Grischuk, for Aronian. Fedosiev is not out of the hot water yet as well, Tanya. There's plenty more to go before we find out which 8 players go to Norway.
Fedosiev needs the 5th place in Division 1, and he's had a fantastic start, taking down Arjun Erigaisa, and Levon Aronian needs a fantastic start today. It will be a best of 4. He's up against the world #1, and we've often seen against Magnus, you know, the first few games is really where you want to try to strike the first game if possible. So it will be about whether Levon can get some creative play going, try to create some chaos on the board early on, and I think that's what he will be aiming for. Meanwhile, surprisingly, no chaos in Magnus's room there. Usually, John, it's a lot messier than how we see it right now.
Wait, really? That's tidy? Really?
Looks pretty organized, no?
Yeah, I feel like there's looks pretty organized, and then we've at least managed to structure throwing everything on the sofa. And I say that because I'm maybe this is where I'm a grandmaster. I'm absolutely a GM at chucking everything on a sofa in a way that I think makes sense. But for some reason, I subsequently get yelled at for it quite a lot. So maybe Magnus is getting away with that. I don't know. I should stress that it's not yet Last Chance Saloon, of course, for Levon Aronian. This is the winner's bracket after all. It's technically not Last Chance Saloon for anybody, because even if they lose their next match, they go into the loser's bracket and they are able to make their way back out. But obviously a win here for him, I think, would all but cement his opportunity to be in Oslo. Very, very important to try and get this match on the cards for him. Firouzja Grischuk, on the other hand, Alireza feeling super chilled out. He's already booked his ticket to Norway. So what kind of chess might we be expecting here? Are we going to see more or less fireworks as a result?
I mean, we know these two players. I think we are guaranteed fun over the chessboard. Grischuk had a great win yesterday against Arjun. Did not need an Armageddon for that one. Magnus Carlsen has joined us. He's ready, getting his cameras in place, getting ready to go for his game one. Definitely the players who've made it to Oslo, John. For them, the pressure is in some ways off. We know their ambition and we know they want to go all out, but it's really Levon Aronian in this match who needs to find a way to create his chances against the world number one. Never easy. Meanwhile, we get some peek into Magnus's second camera. All fair play. Checks underway.
I love that. Second camera. He's got a second gaming chair. So in esports, when we say, oh yeah, someone's absolutely...
Once upon a time, John, he was a streamer.
Right? Yeah. This team's absolutely destroying the other. This is an incredible performance. They must have a great gaming chair. It turns out the secret is to have two. So Magnus doesn't even just have one. So clearly that's the way to go.
And the secret is that it has to be Secret Lab. And we see both the chairs right in front of us. We've seen Magnus use that with his friends on the many, many streams. But right now that's being used for his second phone to keep an eye on the screen. Meanwhile, does Magnus just look like he's just gotten out of bed?
Yeah, he kind of does. But he either looks like he's just gotten out of bed or he's just biked in the rain to his Olympiad board in Budapest.
Or he just
it is a very similar kind of look.
In a long time.
It's a very, very similar look indeed. But you know what? When you look at his eyes, you know he's ready, and he's just like ready to be switched on just like that. So even if he's just gotten out of bed, if that is true, he's certainly ready to play some chess.
He's repping his ChessCom t-shirt as he gets ready to start the games. The players are ready. We can see Levon. He's ready to go as well on his screen. Looks pretty relaxed for this one. And there we have him.
Does he sink deeper and deeper into his chair the more relaxed he gets? Like maybe Levon gets into a winning position in one of the games and we just see like his face slowly slide below the bottom of the camera as he sinks deeper into that chair. He's very chilled out at the moment, not showing us very much in the way of emotion.
And that's a sign of a top class player, right? He's playing against Magnus, but he doesn't want to give away any body language where he might be nervous. To me, it looks like he's got his leg up on the chair or the table, and he's he gets up now. He's getting ready to go. I think in just a few seconds, we will have the first moves. And I'm excited to see what the opening will be about. Because really, John, when you're playing against Magnus, we've seen this time and time again in the Champions Chess Tour. You really want to bring in the chaos. You want to get those kind of positions where mistakes can happen from both players. And that's where the opportunity lies. Like, create a mess as quickly as you can. But it's never easy when you're playing against Magnus Carlsen, and especially you start with the black pieces.
Well, yeah, let me turn that question around for you, Tanya. Do you really want to be creating that much of a mess when one of the masters of navigating his way out of a mess with an advantage that he will comfortably convert, even if it takes him 100 moves? Magnus does that for breakfast, right? Do you really want to be creating a mess against someone like that? Or do you want to frustrate Magnus with the black pieces, play something super solid, grind out a draw, and save the mess for when you have white? Like, what's the better strategy? Is there a right answer?
Magnus grinds out for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks in between. So I think those kind of positions are really tough to break him in. We've seen during the Champions Chess Tour, and the Maxime Vachier-Lagrave Magnus Carlsen match comes to mind as well to me, where Maxime was able to beat Magnus twice, or how Alireza did it as well. It always seems to be in positions which are completely chaotic, hard to understand, where humans can go wrong, and sometimes Magnus Carlsen can be human as well. But again, this is a longer match. It's a best of 4, so you have to be careful. As you said, sure, you want to create chaos, but maybe wait for it when you've got the white pieces. For now, maybe on Levon's mind is just to have a solid start.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We're almost in danger of slipping into Olympiad territory there, right? Play solidly, play defensively, but get a really good result as black and surprise your opponents with white and bring home the full point. That could well be what we're talking about in Levon versus Magnus, but so hard to predict because Aronian is such a fantastic player of great versatility. What about the other match as well? This is an interesting one between Firouzja and Grischuk. Just a word on that before we go into the game, Tanya, because Firouzja's already qualified to Norway, right? So he's got nothing to lose. It's Grischuk that has the pressure on him here.
You're absolutely. It's the same storyline for Levon as it is for Grischuk. Alireza, he won a tournament to punch his ticket, and for Alexander Grischuk, it is this final event. He wants to get through, but it's one match at a time. He knows that Alireza has been a player who's so in form right now. He's played exceptionally well. So it's going to be a tough fight, but Grischuk coming in form in this one as well. Let's jump to the action as we've got moves coming in. And speaking about trying to create chaos, well, for now, everything's under control. The pawn has been picked up as well. Levon looking to try to develop on the queen side. The B pawn would have hit the queen, so the queen falls back. Gaining space on in the center of the board right now. Everything under control for both players. A solid start.
Yeah, a lot of queen moves out of the opening for Magnus here, but all fairly well prepared and fairly standard for both sides. White's going to be castling a king side. A little bit of a difference in pawn structures here. Black is missing a D pawn, whereas white is missing a C pawn. But extremely early days to have us tell you what that's likely to mean come an end game or something like that. Still lots of pieces on their starting squares. We need a little bit more information before this board will truly come to life.
I couldn't agree more with you. And I think right now, these are the kind of openings where it's really not as much about concrete moves as it is about the setup that you want to take with your pieces. At some point, I am expecting Levon to advance on the queen side with the B pawn, but you always have to watch out for knight jumps in those cases. So it might be a good moment to actually just develop the other pieces. Often the queen lands on C7, the bishop on the king side lands on E7, get your king to safety, and then find a way to start pushing on the queen side. Meanwhile, for Magnus Carlsen, it will be about trying to strike in the center of the board at the right time with the D pawn. As you rightly pointed out, that white's got the D pawn, black doesn't. D4 always on the card, but needs to come at the right moment.
Yes, because otherwise you get, I guess we might end up having this conversation later on, Tanya, in this game. But I guess if white plays D4, you always have to think, is it possible for black to play C4 in response and have black's attack on the queen side faster than white's attack in the center? And sometimes yes, sometimes no, but that's always got to be a question you're asking yourself in this sort of position, right? Whoa, no, it's not. We're just doing it. Okay.
We're going to find out. And Levon answers for us. So the ideas that we were discussing, both of them on the board. Magnus strikes in the center. Levon decides it's time to get the bishop into the game. But right now, the queen is under attack. So first, he needs to take a moment to find a good square for the queen. The most natural one to me that comes to mind is simply slide over up one square ahead. Keep the queen connected to the pawn on C5. The next move, you want your bishop here. Yes, the knight could jump into the game, but you always have bishop sliding over to B7 to block out that diagonal.
And with the pawns advancing on the queen side as well, we're not realistically looking at castling queen side. We are likely going to be castling short very, very soon for white. You don't really want to be moving into a pawn storm like this. Black still has one minor piece left, that bishop, which is almost certainly going to E7 before we complete development there and get castled. But things looking pretty chilled out. The one thing I would point out is that bishop on G2 has a pretty tasty long diagonal right now where a rook is just kind of lying in wait. So at all times, Levon has to be looking out for moves like knight to E5 with discovered attacks, for example. Not necessarily accomplishing a material advantage here, but you're just constantly worried about it in the back of your mind until you get clear.
I believe Levon's looked at this already and decided he doesn't care as much because he does have the developing move bishop b7, trying to get rid of the sniper that you pointed out. It really is a key piece in white's position, you very rightly said. For Magnus, a beautiful bishop on g2 on the long diagonal. And for Levon, in these kind of positions as black, you really want to trade this bishop off. So bishop to b7 would be the response if the knight was to jump forward.
Now, if is there a universe, Tanya? I'm just stirring the pot here. Is there a universe where the bishop comes out to b7, the dark square bishop comes out to e7, and then Levon unleashes with h5? Does that world exist?
I think every universe and every world is possible when it comes to Levon. He's truly known as the artist. He's such a creative player. So will not be surprised if he finds a way to create some activity on the king side. But for now, John, I do believe, especially with the last few moves that Lev has played, that he's eyeing activity more on where he's expanded, which is the queen side right now. And Magnus immediately starts targeting that. He pushes the a pawn. He's trying to provoke black to push this b pawn one step ahead, which would create a nice little square for that white knight eventually to go over to. And I also want to mention that after a move like b4, white would also have an intermezzo, an in-between move of a5 before perhaps getting even more aggressive with the white knight.
Oh, wow. Yeah, potentially going in there. That would be very interesting indeed. Bishop b7 has been found, by the way. So the move to try and not only maintain the tension, but just diffuse some of the tactics white has in this position to maintain what might be a very, very slender lead in terms of space. Although there's an argument to say white's actually done quite a good job of getting to this position. Black feels like we should have an opportunity to progress, for example, on the a7 to g1 diagonal. If that pawn gets taken on c5, the bishop comes straight out. So not something Magnus wants to be helping Levon do. Or, as soon as I say that, maybe it is. I'm pretty sure we're going to see bishop takes pawn there. Completing development and setting up to castle. I suppose knight takes is possible, but bishop feels way more natural.
I like what you're saying, and I completely agree with you. You know, you're developing in one move with a threat, and now white, the computer points it out as well. Magnus will castle, defending the f2 pawn. Levon can do the same, and to me, it just looks like Lev's managed to get a great position out of the opening. The pieces are developed. The bishop is eyeing that very strong piece you earlier highlighted for Magnus. The knight's also doing a good job. Meanwhile, it looks like black's rook will eventually come onto the c line. A nice file where black can start doubling up as well at some point. You place one rook on the d file, one rook on the c file. I think Levon should be very happy with the start in the match.
It feels very natural for black, doesn't it? Because you have open files on C and D. It's clear you simply need to castle, get your rooks onto those open files. Yes, the double bishops looking at the queen side is a little bit of a worry for black, but with a rook on c8 and d8, neither of those squares are squares that the bishops are looking at, so it's okay. b4, the idea you were saying earlier, Tanya, b4 has been played, and instantly the computer's not giving us time to think about it even. That intermezzo that you already covered is saying this is the move to play, otherwise black gets an advantage, and that has been found by Magnus Carlsen.
And the move is on the board, and I'm very surprised because when you play a move like b4, you have to be very sure about it. You leave some key squares behind. Also, now Magnus immediately retreats with the knight, attacking that queen before he decides where to jump with his own knight. His last move seems to imply that he probably wants to get the knight to the center of the board because now the bishop and the queen both would defend that square. And this knight from e1, notice how it slyly defends the queen. So after knight e4, there are no tactics, or knight a4, there are no tactics with bishop takes pawn. And maybe we'll just quickly show these lines because knight to e1 was very, very important before you move the knight. But the players are just moving in so quickly right now. And John, I'm just going to quickly back up at this point. Levon made the move queen to c6. And the whole point is that, yes, you've created a battery, but you're also eyeing white's queen on c2. So if Magnus would have rushed with moving that knight away, boom, this bishop jumps to f2, clearing up the path for the queen. You lose the queen, you lose the game. Boom. Thank you very much. So Magnus very precisely first jumps back with the knight, not only defending that bishop, but also that queen, making sure that the knight can jump out of the way without any tactics. And we see the queen fell back. The knight goes on to a4. The bishops have been traded, and Levon now replaces the bishop with his own queen on this beautiful diagonal. The knight comes back into the game, blocking the check, and a rook to c8 on the board, defending the bishop, lining up the rook against the white queen. Once again, I'm liking how Levon's playing. He's putting on the pressure. He's creating these concrete moves and ideas, starting from the sequence with b4.
I thought we were also going to see a potential intermezzo with b3 first before rook c8, but I guess maybe the reason that might not be the hottest idea is because at some moment later on, the white's knight on f3 only needs one move to go via d2 or d4 to attack that pawn. So maybe it's not quite as secure as I first gave it credit for.
And he also calculating lines of what would happen if there would be a trade, and he decides to keep that pawn on b4. We see this. Now there's a different imbalance in the position, right, John? Because white has got a bishop and a knight versus two knights. Now, conventionally, in an open position, that should favor the side with the bishop. The bishop on f4, which cannot be challenged, can also land on d6. And the more I look at it, you can probably do it immediately as well, because you're just stopping that black king from getting to safety. I like bishop d6 right now.
Bishop d6 looks really, really fun. I mean, at the end of the day, black has delayed castling to get to this position, and there's a lot of piece activity, but at the moment, maybe there's a lot of piece activity for not that much in the way of cost, and bishop d6 is a way of white saying to black, okay, now there is a cost involved. Now I'm going to make you really work hard for the for your right to castle. So suddenly, Magnus putting the pressure back on Levon here, saying, what do you want to do about this?
And I think it's very concrete as well, because the first thing that came to my mind was this knight jumps to e4. You're hitting this bishop. The rook clears the path, hitting the queen. But let's not forget, Magnus has the a4 square. Thank you to that a5 pawn that moved on earlier. Queen a4 comes in with a check and also a double attack on this b4 pawn. So knight c to e4 is actually impossible to play right now.
Can we play knight f to e4, and if and that means that the knight on c5 covers the a4 square?
That makes a lot of sense, and you really want to get rid of this bishop because it's such a nail in your position right now. And I believe this is on Levon's radar. I really like your suggestion, knight f to e4. I don't really see a way of keeping... You probably just defend the bishop. Ideas like rook f to d1, defending the bishop, yes, you can take it, but then white's rook will find itself on a nice spot, also eyeing the b6 square. A very complicated position already, and both players under 5 minutes. Now, if Lev was not to go knight f to e4, I'm struggling to find another move, because you can't keep your king in the center of the board forever.
Yeah, exactly. I think... I feel like knight to e4 is the most natural continuation. It has actually been played. The only move I can think that continues this sort of pressure, and I think it might be short-lived, is queen to d1. With the idea being that if you swap off for the bishop, at least you can keep the queen on the diagonal, and you're also getting out of the pin, right? With rook to c1. The problem with that, I think, is that you can just trade off anyway, and then you've got rook d8 at the end of it, and there's just no good square for the queen to go to. You can park yourself on f5 or something, but black just castles and gets on with the show.
Absolutely. And also ideas of pinning this bishop would be very difficult for white to handle. So instead, we've got a move, which is rook to d1. And I like this because, yes, you can get rid of the bishop. But as we pointed out, the rook just simply replaces that bishop. It's a beautiful square for the rook. It's also eyeing the b6 square. Thank you so much to that pawn on b4, which has now become a weakness. Magnus Carlsen, the pressure is on Lev. John, how much of a body language expert are you? Because I would love to get a read on Lev right now.
Okay, well, before the start of this broadcast, we took a look at him in his chair, and I'm going to go with the level that his nose and glasses were at, above or below the bottom of the screen. He's getting less. He's getting more and more anxious because he's higher up towards the middle of the screen now. We were saying how the more comfortable he gets, the more he's going to slide off the bottom. That's certainly not happening. We've got some deep thought going on right now. 4 minutes 17 plays 3 minutes 5 by the time I say this sentence. So It's getting into blitz territory now for our two super GMs.
It is, and Levon is in trouble. His king is still in the center. Magnus putting on the pressure, and I'm sure Lev is feeling it. Let's take this moment to just zoom out of this one and check in with our clash of generations here. Alireza Firouzja, who's been on fire farm. He's been Firouzja over the last few months. Incredible chess by him. We've been seeing a sort of a resurgence of Firouzja this year has been, but he's up against the former world blitz champion, Alexander Grischuk. It's not going to be easy for Firouzja. Grischuk as well, super motivated in this one. It could be his ticket to that Oslo final. And this is what we have on our live board right now.
So when you have someone with such amazing experience, like World Blitz champion, it's nothing to be sniffed at, right? But Firouzja at the same time is an absolute speed chess god. So this clash of generations here, I can't think of anything more appropriate in the Generation Cup by Julius Baer. This is a really entertaining match because it's not only just this particular match, it's very much a can the old guard still show the new boys a thing or two? And I'd love to be able to say yes, but Firouzja's been on fire recently.
Absolutely, and it's an entertaining matchup, but right now the only player having all the fun is Alireza Firouzja in this position. A very different run from the Magnus Levon board because here it's more strategic and positional. Just going to highlight a few points that I believe that, yes, the bar might say that it's level, but if anyone can push, it has to be white here. The only open file in the position is the C line, and white's the one that controls it. A rook on C7, the queen on C1. Also notice the bishop complex here. Light squared bishop with a pawn on D5. The white bishop at some point can start attacking it from either of these two squares. Meanwhile, the pawn on D4, absolutely safe. For Grischuk, his bishop is going to play a defensive role. For Alireza, the bishop on D3, better placed, a more active piece than its counterpart. It just feels that it's sort of a position for two results right now. Alireza is the one with all the positional trumps. It might not be enough to win the game, but it's definitely enough to enjoy your position.
Well, the decision to trade queens means that there's one less extremely complicated piece on the board for both sides. So perhaps already acknowledging that some of those advantages might not be good if we gave away some key diagonals for the monarch in this position. And suddenly, with identical, well, more or less identical pawn structures, I can't see the H pawn and double G pawns playing a decisive role in the end of this game. I'm looking for additional ways for white to attack. Oh, and we immediately have our answer. But offering to trade off the doubled pawn here, Tanya, I get that the bishop's an important defensive piece, but aren't we getting closer and closer now towards a game that's very demonstrably equal?
I would be afraid of actually trading off this pawn because it gives such a lovely square for this knight to jump into, not only putting pressure on the E6 bishop, but also the pawn on D5. So Grischuk needs to defend accurately here. Pawn takes pawn, yes, it feels like you really also cannot allow white to push this pawn one step ahead, but it comes with its own set of drawbacks. It's going to be a bit of a grind, I believe, this one by Firouzja, and Grischuk has got some work to be done, especially notice how the rooks, the white rook is so active, black's rook in passivity. Grischuk decides to keep the pawn, pushes it forward. Looks like he's not too worried about F5. The only good square I see for the bishop is retreating on D7. Grischuk on the defense in this one, but John, I really want to switch back to Magnus versus Lev. It's heating up out there.
Okay, well, G4 has just been pushed, so exactly like you said, Tanya, maybe a little bit reticent to swap off that bishop. Let's take a look at how the Levon Magnus game is coming along. So this is Firouzja versus Grischuk on the other board. Here we go. Okay. Rook's chasing queens around the board. The B2 pawn being put under a fair amount of pressure here. We've got, let me see, 4 and 1 versus 4 and 2. So it looks like there's an additional pawn for the side of Magnus Carlsen. Levon Aronian is trying to make something work here in terms of forcing maybe a doubled pawn if the queen moves. There's a little bit more activity. But Magnus doesn't care. He's happy to play this and squeeze that extra pawn's advantage. I can't think of many things that are more Magnus than that.
But I love the way Levon's handled this. We saw Magnus putting so much pressure out of the opening, and Levon sacrifices a pawn to get some piece activity. Yes, he's got little time. He's under 30 seconds, but the more that it gets simplified, the easier it gets to hold. Look at that. The rook on the open line, attacking that b2 weakness. The queen jumps in, hitting the pawn, hitting the rook. The piece activity more than compensates, I believe, for that extra pawn, and really nicely handled by Levon. This is what I love and learn so much from the top-class, world-class players. They are not afraid of sacrificing material to make sure that their pieces remain active in the game. They aren't as attached to pawns as they are to piece activity. And we see the pawn's been recaptured. Black will perhaps lose this a pawn because the rook can jump on to d6. No way to actually defend this pawn. Magnus calculating, does he want to throw in a check before he does that? Yes, you have an extra pawn, but this, at Lev's level, I believe he will hold this position, and he knows how this is done. It's not over yet, but John, I think Lev will hold this one.
It's playing for two results from Magnus's point of view, right? If Levon Aronian is able to make even a single mistake, Magnus takes these wins all day long. Like, it's just what Magnus does, right? But at the same time, Levon Aronian has so much experience that you would expect this under normal circumstances to be a fairly easy to hold draw. And I say normal circumstances, Tanya, because at the end of the day, one of the things Magnus is absolutely amazing at doing is finding every single possible resource in any position. And when you're playing against someone with less than 20 seconds left on his clock, I feel like it really is one of those anything is possible. And if Magnus is playing on the part of anything, you do still have to be sweating a fair bit.
Completely agree, especially when you've got 20 seconds on the clock. And look at that. You were talking about Magnus finding every single resource. He sacrifices a pawn temporarily to make his own king active. And at some point, he is looking at this king getting close to that a pawn to try to assist it to queening. But right now, Levon has managed to equalize the material. Magnus pushes that a pawn, and now the black king is tied down to these two squares. You really cannot advance with the king or move anywhere because the rook will move in with a tempo. Magnus getting his king into the game using those light squares. But how far can this king really get? Because black has got his own counterplay trying to create a passer. I think this is some brilliant defense by Levon. He's saying, sure, come in with your king, but I'm advancing those pawns. Whoa.
This is, H3
Whoa.
played, and the eval bar did not like that one single bit. Magnus sees it as well. He's shaking his head, but rook a3 wasn't the correct response.
John, I'm sorry, you could have just gone king f7, rook f4 is checkmate. You cannot save it. It's a maiden one. You just take away the e6. Oh my goodness, Levon misses it. Unbelievable.
So on the live,
instead.
oh.
And we will bring
you
up
could
this
see
moment
Magnus
at the end
saw
of
it
the
as
game.
well. He had his hand up in the air. Like, Magnus won't play anything that isn't perfect chess, right? He has such high standards for himself, but Magnus spotted it as soon as it was played, and Levon has less than 10 seconds remaining. That was a big get out of jail free moment for Magnus.
Oh my gosh, I missed the player's reaction. Did Levon react to that moment? Do you think he spotted it after
Levon
playing?
did not react. Magnus reacted on Levon's move, but Levon did not react.
Unbelievable. I don't know if Levon still knows what he missed, because very often it's better not to know if you missed an opportunity. He could have checkmated Magnus by force. You move the king one step, take away the running square, and that's it. And there's nothing that Magnus could have done to defend that checkmate. What a huge miss.
Still continuing to find resources in this position, and Magnus not wanting to give up the pawn on f2.
But this is just a draw now. This is nothing really to play for. I think this is going to end any moment, and it could have ended in complete disaster for Magnus Carlsen.
That was a heart and throat moment. It'll be interesting afterwards to understand to what extent Levon was also aware of that. But this is going to be a dead draw. The rooks have come off as well. Nice and straightforward, but a very fiery game number one.
He knows. He knows what he survived. He smiled again.
Yeah.
He knows that he was so close to disaster in that moment. And Lev, he's going to find out now. He's going to play the moves back. He's going to see what happened. And I think he will know what a golden opportunity he just missed against the world number one.
That was absolutely fantastic stuff. Yeah, Levon is going to be looking through that game and go, oh, we actually had a little bit of a situation there. Okay, good to know for the next. But the important thing is we've got half a point on the board. Now is the time to reset.
Wow, just unbelievable what just happened as we still continue to see the players on cam. I really don't know what's going on in Lev's mind, but I have no doubt that he's seen what he missed at that moment. King to f7 would have been a completely different story. Meanwhile, I believe we have a result on Alireza, Alexander Grischuk, and Alireza did grind that endgame down.
Okay, so Alireza Firouzja 1-0 up over Alexander Grischuk. That was a very, very nice way to start off. A win with the white pieces. Magnus Carlsen survives a two-mover in a very, very tense blitz finish, but he gets the half point in the first one here. Remember, this is the winner's bracket, so these are best of 4, 10+2 games. So there's plenty of opportunity for both players to make it back. Grischuk now has the white pieces as well, but opening salvo here going the way of Firouzja.
Absolutely. I think from the very start, he had that upper edge. He was pushing in that game, and a very difficult game to really hold on to because you're under pressure from the start. You know what? It's a game for 2 results, and Alireza was really able to build it. And John, I think very often we relate Alireza to this, and he really is a very creative attacking player, but he also plays these strategic end games to perfection so many times. And I believe that's one part of the game that he's really worked on over the last year. And we can see the results over the board as well as in online chess. When he gets those slightly better end games, he's very often able to channel his inner Magnus Carlsen as well.
That's actually a great talking point there, Tanya, because especially like for a player with your experience, for example, it's you're able to play positionally when you need to. You're able to play super sharp and tactically when you need to. But what I tend to find really difficult is knowing when to switch between those two mindsets, especially in the middle of a game. And I guess at classical time controls, that's difficult enough. But in a time control like this, when you're having to do it with seconds, to decide when that moment is, that must be crazy difficult for these players.
If you have to be the best, you have to be able to do it, right? At the very top, I think all the players are very universal in their style, but instinctively, yes, they've got a certain kind of position, a certain kind of strategies that they do like, and often we see them play out in their decisions. Alireza, very aggressive, but once again shows his class in these technical position with that win against Grischuk. But oh my God, what a moment that was for Levon that he just missed. And you know, it happens because you're in this mindset of defending a game for so long that when you get that one window of opportunity, you're not even looking for it. It's not even in your radar, you know? It's not even something that you think is possible. And all of us have been in that situation where it's so easy to miss that spot. We see the eval bar jump up and immediately we know that there was something here. But you're not looking for something, you're not going to find it.
No. Exactly. We have the benefit of the eval bars, of course. The players live do not. So unless you are actively looking out, you might not spot it. I wonder if that's going to make a big impact to the final scoreboard later on. Here's what the bracket looks like at the moment. Levon Aronian currently trading half points with Magnus Carlsen. Alireza Firouzja is 1-0 up against Alexander Grischuk, former Blitz world champion. Remember, so very much a clash of the generations there, with the younger generation getting that first point on the board, but plenty of life left in this match. Bear in mind as well, we're in the winner's bracket. This is not best of 2, it's best of 4. So each player will get an opportunity to play with the white pieces and black pieces twice each. It is far, far from over. We're not in a position where Firouzja only has to secure the match with the draw or anything like that. Everything is on the line still. We are fighting tooth and nail. And in the case of Levon Aronian, Magnus Carlsen, Tanya, psychologically, Levon, I think he had a reputation, maybe, at least at the start of the Olympiad, of being a little bit of a Houdini. He managed to find draws in losing positions. He managed to find a win in a game where he was perhaps in a losing position. So even though he missed that move, I feel like he's got to be taking some heart from that. He's thinking to himself, oh, I can get Magnus into this sort of position. Magnus can make these sorts of mistakes against me. I won't miss that again.
But that's the thing. You don't get this chance again against a player like Magnus Carlsen. And when you get it, you've got to take it. And Levon's very aware of how much this could impact his match, but he has to let this go. He did nothing wrong in the game. I think once again, it was a greatly played game by him. Magnus putting early pressure, Levon finding ways to get activity, and then that one missed opportunity, right? He was playing on seconds at that moment. He had barely any time on the clock, and we saw Magnus's reaction. Magnus immediately spotted the mistake. He had gone far too ahead with his own king to a place where there was a point of no return, taking the only square away and then threatening checkmate. A huge opportunity missed by Levon. And once again, Magnus doesn't give you too many of those. So this could really hurt Lev.
And Magnus knows as well, right? So we saw that immediate reaction from Magnus. Extremely clear that he knows what he just put on the board and that he got away with it. He'll be making sure he doesn't give an opportunity like that away again, like you said, Tanya. But in time pressure, anything can happen. We've got moves getting ready to be played on the board here. Firouzja looking very calm. I would say Grischuk is looking very pensive, like maybe thinking about what sort of strategy to use or what openings he wants to be playing. So that's interesting. E3 on the board for Levon Aronian against Magnus Carlsen.
Is that a mouse slip, or was that part of Levon's plan?
It's the attempted bong cloud.
I'm actually really thinking if E3 is actually what Lev wanted. I'm not so sure. And did you see that shake of his head right there?
It might have been a mouse slip.
It might have been. He's going B4 now, so he wants to get the bishop out on the long diagonal. I wonder if the shake of the head was E3 or what just went on his mind about what he missed in that last game. We will find out hopefully later on from Lev what really happened there. But he definitely knows that that king F7 could have changed a lot for him. And right now, again, he has to do it all over again with white. Now the structure that we see, perhaps it was part of the plan because he's got this offbeat opening, a creative opening from the very start, getting Magnus out of the book. Once again, it's all about the structures and the piece setup here. It worked the first time around. Why not the second time?
Okay, so this is looking a little bit more normal here now. Let's go ahead and take a look at the other game. We, of course, hung on rightly to Magnus Carlsen, Levon Aronian in that first game. Very, very tense endgame. But we do have Firouzja Grischuk now being played. Now, remember, Alireza Firouzja has struck first. He won with the white pieces in game number 1. Tanya, in a match where it's a best of 4 rather than a best of 2, is this the correct time to be thinking about pushing for a win? Or have we got a little bit more, I guess, time in the bank for Alexander Grischuk before we start playing anything drastic? Is this going to still be fairly normal?
I would be surprised because you've got 2 whites, right? And you have to maximize your chance in each one of them in this mini match of 4. And we see Grischuk, he's taking his pause. He's thinking about how he wants to approach this opening of the Sicilian where Alireza has gone for this second move of E6. And it's an open Sicilian, knight C6, so offering a knight trade early on. And it's a good moment for Grischuk to decide, does he trade knights? Does he keep more pieces on the board? Right now, I'm just very distracted with Alireza's background. Is that a laughing cow, the cheese poster at the back?
Ooh.
The Red Bull.
So I thought at first glance it was like a I think you might be right, because at first glance I thought it was part of the Chicago Bulls logo.
Yeah,
I thought
he's
it might
a fan. He's a Chicago Bulls fan.
But doesn't it look like the cow's looking off to one side? I'm pretty sure the Chicago Bulls logo, the cow's looking straight at you, which is what's making me not be 100% sure.
Now I see
I don't think
properly.
that. I feel
Maybe
like the
check it
Chicago
out.
Bulls logo. This sounds. I never thought I would say this on a broadcast, but those cow's eyebrows don't look angry enough, Tanya, for that to be a Chicago Bulls logo. That's my expert analysis here. That's my quizmaster analysis. I'm not sure.
My first feeling was the laughing cow, and right now in the position, I don't know who's saying cheese, because it looks like that last move by Grischuk, bishop to e2, it's a more solid approach by white. So I think he's definitely looking for a longer grind, a longer game. Not the most aggressive choice, but it's still going to be an open game, and Alireza, he brings his queen out. Very often, black also pushes the a pawn one step ahead to control the b5 square. He didn't do it. Grischuk immediately takes control of it. F pawn moves forward, now attacking the knight. Things are getting crazy. Counterattacks the knight on f6. We see a trade. Wow, the players are blitzing out their moves. Bishop takes pawn, knight d6 is a big threat. Stop, the d pawn moves forward. Shock castle, they clearly know what they're doing right now.
I'm going to say the obvious here, Tanya, given how much they're blitzing out these moves. I'm guessing this is all prep, but I'm looking at this and it's going so far over my head, I can't even hear the jet engines. This is wild. Getting all the way to not having a g-pawn in front of your king. The queen was on b8 from early doors for Firouzja. This is... First of all, this feels like the kind of opening that people play when they desperately want to get out of book early, but on second thoughts, they were playing the move so quickly that I refuse to believe anyone's out of book right now. They were blitzing this out.
I'm not very familiar with this position that we have on the board, but the point you make is really good, because you don't get into this kind of a position with the speed with which they did, where your knight on b5 is at a point of no return. There's no square back. Meanwhile, black's king, no g-pawn ahead. White is already threatening to obliterate the king side further with the f-pawn moving forward. You only get into this kind of a position if you're familiar with it. So it does look a bit like some kind of an opening prep here by both players, and Alireza takes his first think, because this last move where Grischuk has played his bishop to a more active square, it not only eyes the h7 pawn, but f5, I believe, is a big threat, and he stops it. He stops it forever by moving his own pawn to f5.
And that potentially makes, of course, the pawn on e6 a little bit vulnerable. Or I should say, rather than that pawn being vulnerable, it makes the bishop on c8 a long-term defender, is perhaps what I should say, because there are pieces defending that pawn. So it'll be interesting to see what the longer-term plan is for that light-squared bishop for black. Oh, Tanya, I've got some very important analytical updates here from the desk. It was indeed the laughing cow. Well done.
Well, at least we got that bit right. And
Exactly.
when it is right now in this match, Alireza is the one who's getting the loss. He does lead with 1 point. Grischuk has managed to, by the way, get a very imbalanced position out of the opening. So you were asking this question, right, John? Is it a good time for him to go all out? I think he's trying to do that. He is trying to get a mess on the board. And we see that I'm also very impressed, by the way, with Grischuk's clock management. Usually by now he's playing on 30 seconds, but he's kept things really under control on the clock as well.
It's also worth saying, though, that Alireza is not being fazed by this. He's very, very happy to continue to pile the pressure on. Even though Grischuk is managing his time really well, Firouzja is actually a minute up on the clock. So despite getting into these all of these chaotic sort of complications, Firouzja is just not fazed by this one bit. And now we've got some threats against the pawn on c3, because if the knight drops on b5, the bishop can come in to take. It's Grischuk now that has to have a bit of a think.
And he does. And the move, yes, I was just about to point out, you really want to put your bishop here, because trading this beautiful bishop on g7, which is not only an attacking piece, but also a key defender for the black king, would be ideal. Eventually, the queen can join the king side attack. The knight can reroute itself to a nice square on d4 if allowed to do so. I do like white's position here. You pointed out the e6 pawn as a long-term weakness, the bishop behind that pawn really not doing much at the moment. Alireza trying to create some counterplay. He is attacking the f4 pawn with that queen on b8 from the other side of the board. Right now, the move that comes to my mind, queen to d2, defend that pawn, also eyeing this rook joining the party from that e file as well next. Things look pleasant for Grischuk so far. John, do you think it's a good moment to check back with Magnus while Grischuk takes a think?
Yeah, I absolutely do. Let's take a look at both of these games, because don't forget, they are going on side by side here in the winners bracket semi-finals. Things getting a little bit spicy, actually, between Magnus and Levon. A very aggressive-looking d5 push there. The isolated queen pawn marching down the middle of the board, currently unrestricted. And a really fun move there, knight g5. Don't forget, the pawn on f6 is pinned to the king from Levon Aronian, trying out some fun tactics against Magnus as well. So lots of life in this position.
But did you see what just happened? He went knight to g5. You know, threatening, sorry, in this position, threatening a fork. And Magnus, he defends it, and Levon falls back with the knight. So he wasn't very happy with the knight being there. It felt like a one move. And 1 second. Wait, white is missing a queen here. What? I just realized that this is an insane position. Because Magnus has a queen.
I didn't even
and white
see
has
that.
got 2 minor pieces on the board. And I'm trying to understand
that's a
how
knight
this
and
happened.
bishop for a queen.
I'm going to just quickly go back, and we're going to do a quick action replay to understand.
We need to go back.
So this is where we left it last around here. The knights were traded off. Everything looks normal. The queen and the bishop lined up. And if I had to predict, the sacrifice happened on the g7 square. Bishop developed to the other diagonal, nicely placed. Levon gets the rook to the center of the game. And this is where it happened. He just stepped up with the knight, and instead of just simply falling back with the queen, Lev goes crazy. He gives up the queen for the bishop. King takes queen, picks up the second minor piece, blocks the check
Tanya,
because yes.
Is this some sort of like fantastic positional sacrifice, or is this a moment of madness? I'm not seeing the follow-up.
We're only going to find out in retrospect, because after f6, it is hard to see a follow-up here. I mean, in hindsight, because it depends on how it works out. d5 pawns were traded off, so creating a weakness on the d line, and the rook is nicely placed. Definitely, Levon, he knew that he could have retreated with the queen. He went into it thinking he has enough compensation. So this is how it happened. He didn't jump to g5 from the f3 square like at first I thought. When I didn't even realize there was a queen missing on the board. Queen to e7, stopping that fork. Knight comes back, rerouting itself to a nice square on d4. Rook takes the open file. The knight lands on that square, making sure that the rook doesn't penetrate on the c2 square. Bishop to c6, and this is the position. White attacks the rook. Magnus counterattacks. Levon's rook, more trades on the board. Bishop takes rook. The rook jumps in. This is insane stuff, because now Levon has a rook and a knight for a queen. So that's not a very big material deficit. You're also playing against the d5 pawn, but it shouldn't be enough. That said, practically the bishop on b2 really strong against the king. The knight beautifully placed. Yes, you're up a queen, but where is the queen finding its targets?
It feels like white's pieces are really adequately defended, but I'm also very scared about, pushing pawns and creating more weaknesses, because if black continues to trade more and more pieces off the board, then eventually there's going to be some lovely long-range targets for the queen to target going into the endgame, right? If we see more piece exchanges, white can't keep this up forever.
You're absolutely right. And that's why the move a5, we saw Magnus is trying to create activity for the queen, trying to create squares the queen can come into the game from. And there's also the b file that you could look at attacking at some point. It's definitely progress. Yes, you've got a rook and a knight for a queen. Let's do the math. That adds up to 8 points. A queen is worth 9 points. Once again, it's not that much of a material deficit, but it does look like with the control on the c file, the bishop really nicely actively plays, stopping any attack on the d line. It shouldn't be enough, and Levon's the one who's on the defense.
it feels like if I'm Levon Aronian right now, I'm thinking I'm not in a terrible position. I'm able to defend very, very resolutely on the 7th here. Like, this is not looking terrible, right? But at the same time, I'm going, I'm not looking for not terrible. I'm looking for some sort of like big knockout blow against black. And I don't see where that attack is coming from. The knight on d4 is such a good square. And if you put a rook on d2, it's almost like black can never penetrate that position without sacrificing an exchange because there's no dark square control for black, right? I understand that. What I don't understand is where the plan to win the game comes from here.
But that's the point. I think he's asking Magnus that question because right now, the onus is on Magnus. He's the one who's got the queen. He needs to find a way. And I think that queen is headed to the central e4 square from which, once again, it can start penetrating into white's camp. The bishop also coming on to d1, hitting, displacing the rook. Just, you need to find a way to destabilize white's pieces. Levon's done a great job in making sure that every piece defends another piece. Everything is really nicely defended. So Magnus still has to find a breakthrough in the position. And I'm not seeing that. It's not very clear what is the winning plan here. Yes, you can place your queen on a nice square to e4, but what's next? Yes, you could get it to b1, but the rook can never join the attack because the bishop on b2 does a really nice job of defending the last rank. He stops it.
He stops it indeed. I'm looking at, can the queen come into d3? Okay, cool. Magnus has just answered that question for me. And now my question is, where do I want my king and pawns to be? And I'm asking that because white's pieces are beautifully coordinated, Tanya. There's absolutely no denying that. Black's pieces are getting to a point where I'm tempted to say they're beautifully coordinating as well. So what gives in this position? What is going to be giving out first? Are we going to see the black king walk up via h6, for example, to support g5 or something like that? Like, I'm just making this up on the spot, but I'm trying to think, what can black continue to do to improve piece position? And I'm now looking at pawns and kings.
And that's a great way to put it. You want to improve your pieces. Now, the only problem with pushing your pawns is that you might end up giving some key squares to the knight for activity. But your point about improving the position of a piece, I think that's key. One plan that comes to my mind for black is reroute the rook. You come back to either c8 or c7, and the idea is that you're eyeing the e file. I see one weakness in white's camp. You want to start targeting that. You're also trying to get to the b file for potential sacrifices and hits on that b2 square. I'm actually expecting Magnus to, like you said, John, try to improve the position of this rook, which right now visually looks like it's really beautiful, but doesn't really have any targets right now.
And that's the problem, isn't it? Like, the rook is eyeing up some delightful squares. It's protecting the bishop on a4. It's stopping the instant taking of the c file. It's threatening, well, not threatening, but it's eyeing up the knight, but there's no killer blow. The rook's not threatening anything particularly threatening heading into the rest of this game. Whereas elsewhere, I'm looking at g5 breaks. I'm looking at what happens if black maybe finds a... In fact, that's actually the only thing. I was about to say something else, and then I just realized it doesn't work. So what is white playing for here? So we now know that maybe rerouting the rook, getting the rook back to c8 would be an excellent shout, like you said, Tanya. There's the potential to reroute the king and go to g5, but like you say, that opens up some squares for the knight, maybe not what we want. Where's white looking to create an advantage? Is white looking to create an advantage?
And right now, Magnus has improved the position of his bishop. Allow one more move, the bishop lands on e4. I don't believe that Levon can survive once the bishop comes to e4 and the rook as well. Then ideas of the rook getting itself to a nice open file on the b line, targeting the b2 pawn, the b2 bishop, it can create a lot of danger. This might be a big moment, and Lev might be forced to think about, make a critical decision with a minute and a half on the clock. Does he allow the bishop to live? Is bishop e4 as dangerous as it looks visually? To me, I would be petrified. I would be terrified of allowing that bishop to land on e4. The rook on e1 will be forever defending the e3 pawn, and he does take the decision to get rid of that bishop, giving away his beautiful knight in return. But I think it was the need of the hour. And now Magnus has to retake. He's thinking, I'm surprised, because you've got to take with your queen, right? You really don't want to double up your f-pawn. Or do you?
Well, if you
no,
take,
you don't.
If you take with the queen, you allow, I guess, rook d2. And then because the rooks are... Oh, no, never mind. The computer's instantly saying, shut the heck up, John. I was looking at rook d2 on the... Oh, you know what? I feel so much better now. But honestly, I was thinking if you keep hold of the dark squares, that would make good sense. But this falls to a tactic. I certainly didn't see it. I'm maybe not expected to see it. But rook takes f4 is the move here. That gets missed as well. Wow. Rook takes f4, of course.
Magnus didn't see the tactic. And rook to d2, Levon says, you know, computer, I don't care what you say. He goes for your move, but rook to take pawn was the tactic that was missed. You take the rook back, the queen takes the pawn. It's a check. The rook is hanging. This would have been game over.
Dear.
Instead, Magnus goes in with that rook to c2. It's insane because Magnus just returns the favor that Lev made in that previous game, but perhaps in this one, it's not as decisive because Magnus still keeps a huge advantage. And now, John, the computer wants to go your way. G5 has to happen.
That is mad. I love, by the way, one very important thing, Tanya, I should point out, Magnus did not react to the blunder like he did in the previous game, which means he hasn't seen it yet. So he's only going to see that in post-mortem. So that's particularly telling as well. We didn't see any big reaction from him on the camera. In fact, neither player here showing any sort of big reaction. And, oh, wow, a4 being touted as a move, I guess to stop the pawn from being fixed on a dark square when there's still a dark square bishop here for white. But I'm getting very, very tactically scared right now in this position. If these players were missing a couple of the moves that we've just seen, I'm wondering what else there is here.
It just looks like a dominating position, right? White is on the defense, and Lev's been on the defense throughout since that queen sacrifice, really creative sacrifice, and perhaps he just felt like things were going south for him, so he needed to do something at that point. But he's been holding on. Now, he's looking for a fortress, and the one guy who doesn't believe in fortresses is Magnus. He knows that he will find a way to break through right now. King to g1 played, getting out of the way on the second rank. I love the e4 square for the queen. You can put it there anytime. Yep. At some point, I am expecting your move, and he does it. John, it's on the board, g5 played, trying to create some weaknesses. I think Magnus is also eyeing the move g4 at the right time. It's not easy. The evaluation bar doesn't give a massive advantage. But for a player with 20 seconds on the clock, you're up against Magnus Carlsen so hard to keep the defense going. Yes, you'll defend for 5 moves. You'll play accurately for another 10. But in this, Levon's got to be accurate perhaps for the next 100 moves.
Quite right, indeed. We just saw an arrow on rook takes rook. That didn't happen, but a pair of rooks get swapped off anyway. And now we can see Magnus infiltrating with the queen. A3 pawn under direct threat.
You've got to defend it. And there's no really good way because the bishop has to defend the rook. You can't go bishop c5.
Short-lived. Nope. Won't work.
He goes rook to h6. So why can't Magnus just pick up this pawn on a3? I mean,
he can.
And he does. This has to be bad for white. Yes, you get the g5 pawn, but look at that a pawn. I think what Lev is trying to do, he eventually wants to sacrifice his bishop for this a pawn once it gets to a1 and create some kind of a fortress. If Levon can win these 2 pawns, give up the bishop for the a pawn, there's hope in that position. I think it's very difficult to break that, which is why Magnus keeps the queen defense. This could be really smart by Lev. He's given up. He's going to give up this. He's happy to give up the bishop for this a pawn, but he's trying to win as many pawns along the way as he can.
If we can get into a position where we've gotten absolutely all the pawns off the board except the a pawn, then we'll try and use the material to manufacture a scenario where it's difficult for Magnus to convert. I mean, with 2 seconds added per move and 3 seconds on the clock, though, I feel like there's an opportunity for a critical mistake here. This is really scary stuff indeed. A2 now on the chessboard. Levon Aronian, 3.7 seconds left on the clock. Rook coming back to f1 to defend the queening square. The bishop on d4 just about holds it all together. And Magnus can afford a couple of seconds to think the king's coming in as well.
Magnus has got enough queens to let one be hanging because you can't take it. But look at the way Lev's playing. He's got no time
Magnus asking the question.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. Small shake of the head there. And I think both players will be looking at that game now, asking themselves a variety of questions, no doubt. But the result is on the board, and that means that our second game, so we're halfway through now, the winners semifinals. Let's go ahead and take a look at that scorecard. Magnus Carlsen wins game number 2 with black against Levon Aronian to take a crucial lead going into the second half. We've got a Firouzja and Grischuk a little bit more relaxed there. The players settling for a draw this time, and it looks like Grischuk was able to grab that draw with the white pieces, so all is good. Very, very intense finish to that game there, Tanya, but Carlsen now with the advantage.
Such a tense finish that was, and just when it looked like Levon is so close to getting a fortress, and John, I won't be surprised if it is one, because it's hard to imagine how Magnus was planning to improve. And you keep playing moves on seconds, and then he just got flagged. I think at some moment he just lost that understanding of how much time he had, because he was so surprised on the camera that he ran out of time in that moment. After doing everything right, getting through the tough part, and then you've got this baggage from that first game where you've missed a win in one, and then this one falls apart as well. It's going to be very tough for Lev to come back.
Yeah, and we of course had another opportunity in game number 2 as well, where there was that missed tactic with the queen fork towards the end of the game. So mistakes happening on both sides there, but ultimately Magnus winning on time when he posed an additional question to say, what are you going to do if I just march my king up? You've got 3 seconds left to decipher this. And that was ultimately one step too far. Speaking of problems being deciphered, we of course have a relationship with Rubik's over here at the Champions Chess Tour. And the Rubik's Cube is celebrating 50 years with the Make Your Move campaign. So in the last 50 years, 1 in 7 people across the whole world have attempted solving a Rubik's Cube, myself very much included. And like chess, the art of a Rubik's Cube is in its complexity and the eternal human values of curiosity, perseverance, and creativity. And in my case, additional perseverance, because I still need to solve one. With 43 quintillion permutations and only one solution, what's your next move? Visit go.chess.com/Rubik's50 or use !Rubik's in chat to explore. That's RUBIKS. So we are now halfway through the winners bracket semi-finals, folks. You can see Magnus is off to grab a little bit of a drink and a bit of a break. I reckon you should as well. We've got the final 2 games ready to go when we come back. See you in a sec.
Has to show today. Judah, is very cool to be here with you, and I'm very excited to show you one of my favorite games of yours.
I'm very curious which one you picked. So let's start, and then I tell you which one is it. I'm white, right?
Yeah.
I made e4 all my life, so it's easy. Then I make this. So what did I play here? Because I played bishop b5 and d4.
You played bishop b5.
Okay. Castle. Bishop g7, c3. This is how it went?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell me why do you like this game of mine? Why did you pick this one?
Because I like the open setups.
This game actually we played the first half of the tournament. I won already quite a few games, and I was playing with white against Chilingirova. She's from Bulgaria, and the Women's Chess Olympiad, this was the first Chess Olympiad I played. I was just 12 years old, and it was very special for several reasons for me. Because at the time, in '88, the Olympiads had 4 boards in the open section and only 3 boards at the time in the women's section. And I played together with my sisters, Sofia, she was 14, Susan was 19, and there was another team member, Ildiko Madl, who was also 19. And I was just 12 years old. And I was playing in board 2, so they were kind of happy because I won one game after another. And in those times, it was not team match which counted, but it was board match. So it did matter whether we won our match out of the 3 games 3-0 or 2-1. And my sisters were very happy that I was playing in the middle. And we were always starting with a win by me, or they could count on me winning one game after another. So that was something very nice for them, but it was also very nice for me.
He's not gonna find it. He's got 1 second. 1 second. Oh! Mate on H6. Rook H6 mate.
He's winning.
I can't believe it.
Oh my goodness.
Take. Oh, what?
Right.
Oh! He drops his rook.
Flagging.
D3! Oh, Bach throws!
Antipop wins this game in the craziest manner.
Welcome back, folks. Have you ever wanted to dress up like a king without needing a crown? I do that on a daily basis. Or like a knight without owning a horse? Well, guess what? Now all of you can. We have chess piece costumes, and please, for the love of God, tag Danny Wrench when you post your pictures on social media. Go and live the dream, whether you're a bossy queen, a sneaky bishop, or just a pawn in someone else's game. We've got you covered, literally. Exclamation mark merch in chat is what you need, or visit chess.com/shop to get the party started. We're now going to be hopping into the second half of the winners' semifinals here at the Julius Baer Generation Cup. We can see a Firouzja and definitely not a Grischuk at the moment, so I'm going to guess the other game is starting first, Tanya, but an important question to start things off. If you had to pick a chess piece costume, what are you picking?
Wow. You put me on a spot. That wasn't the question I was expecting, but I think if I had to, then I would like to dress up like a queen for a day.
It's got to be queen for a day. Okay. Now, this is important stuff, man. I have a feeling I'm going to end
every day, but yes, on the outside for Halloween.
I'm going to end up getting dressed up as one of those one day. I'm almost sure of it. So while we wait for this game to get going, let's see what Magnus's game is up to, because I'm sure they are about to start. Let's go ahead and hop on over to that board and see if it's still in its starting position. Okay, one knight f3 has been played. Now, I want to set the stage here, Tanya. This is very important now, because Magnus Carlsen has a 1.5 to a half point advantage over Levon Rodin after that last victory. A full point, a win here is enough to send Magnus Carlsen into the winner's bracket final. So if Magnus can win with the white pieces, this match is over.
Absolutely. And Levon, he would drop down to the loser's bracket, be on his last life. But I think also everything that's happened in this match so far, right? It would have been a completely different story had Levon found king to f7 in that game 1, which would have checkmated Magnus on the next move. Also, in game 2, it felt like Levon had cruised through the difficult path and had set up a fortress, but it's so difficult to keep the position defended against a player like Magnus. You know, you're down a queen, you're trying to find your compensation, you just have to defend for 50 moves. Yes, the best crack. But Levon had done the hard part, and then to flag in that final moment, giving away Magnus this 1.5 to half lead, and like you said, Magnus has got the white pieces. He wins it, he wraps the match in 3. It's definitely on his mind. A draw wouldn't hurt either, but I think if Magnus gets his chance in this one, of course he's going to take it.
And I wonder what that's going to do to Levon's mindset as well, knowing that, well, we know we need to play for a win, maybe not necessarily in this game, but certainly in the next game, right? It's on him to make something work. So it'll be interesting to see how much sharper or how much safer, indeed, that makes game number 3, because psychologically, it could go both ways.
And I think Lev's in this mindset where he wants to get a creative game in every single round, because even the setup that we see that he's taken in this one, you know, with an early development of this knight to the c6 square, it's an offbeat position once again. We haven't seen so many theoretical battles between these two in these, these first 3 games of this match. And I think Levon, even though he's playing black, he still wants to get a game. I don't think it's in his mind that I want to try to just shut this down, finish this in a draw, and I leave it all in that last game. I think for Lev as well, he'll be happy to create a chaos in this one if he gets the opportunity to.
Sure. Well, yes, exactly right. Already liquidating a little bit in the center, and we have a slight differences here with the pawn recapture. A3 getting played now to prevent the knight coming in to B4 from Levon Aronian. So interesting. It's a C pawn for an E pawn. Again, still very much early days, but like you say, if you're Aronian right now, why change it? Even in the game he lost, Tanya, there was an opportunity for checkmate on the board, right? In game number 1, the game he lost, there were opportunities for him to win as well. So yes, he didn't grasp those opportunities, and against Magnus, you don't get them very often. But the best way to try and generate another opportunity like that is to continue playing creatively.
And that's what he's doing. And I like this prophylactic move instead of rushing with development, because he takes control of a key developing square, which would have put pressure on this knight. And let's not forget, it needs to defend d5. So 8-6, I think that was very precise by Lev. He slowed down before making the natural moves. Now he gets the bishop out, expecting him to go shot castle next, put that rook on e8, and then try and land a piece on e4 at the right moment. Magnus will, meanwhile, also go shot castle, and then eventually try to figure out how he wants to develop the rest of his pieces, because it's not so clear. The h-pawn takes away the g5 square from the bishop to come out to. The bishop on d6 takes away the f4 square for the bishop to come out to. So Magnus might have to... In fact, the pressure might be a little bit on Magnus in this one. I really like the way Lev's played this opening, John.
This is... if I'm honest, to me, it just looks fairly solid so far. The plans for both players look evident enough. They seem to be centered both around the center, looking for opportunities for white to potentially push in and grab e4. Similarly for black to try and plant a piece on e4 and keep it there. This is very close to bread and butter chess, I suppose. A lot of your basic principles that you might have been taught... people watching might have been taught, like growing up or first playing, a lot of them are in use in this game. So is that itself a sign, Tanya? Are we seeing something maybe a little bit less offbeat? Are we seeing something a bit more chilled out?
It's definitely a chilled out start, but I feel that if you're black, you're very happy with this position. You've taken out your pieces, and look at that decision by Magnus. It sort of confirms what I'm saying, because you're not super happy about putting your bishop on b2. The d4 pawn is a roadblock on its way. Meanwhile, b4 creates some more weaknesses around white's queen side, the light squares. So Magnus not feeling super comfortable in this one. And Meanwhile, a very different story on our other matchup. And this is going to be a slow grind. I think Lev should be happy with how the game has started, but far way off to call anything. And look at this, Magnus immediately trying to create some activity on the queen side. But John, we got to jump to the other game because it's a mad position out of the opening. It's nothing like what we have on the Magnus board. Alireza Firouzja has gone all out on the king side. And I would love to do an action replay on this.
Yeah, I think I need to as well, because not only is the H pawn moved, the G pawn's moved. White is definitely not castling short anytime soon. This looks wild. And wow, imagine the computer pointing out that the key move is to get the other knight over to B6. This is we've got H5 on the way, as you pointed out on the board here, Tanya. This is messy to the extreme, and I think this is Firouzja trying to pile the heat onto Alexander Grischuk here, basically saying, look, if I win this game, I win the match. I'm going all out. He has not taken the safe approach at all.
And it's easy to miss that, yes, White has got no development, but in compensation, White has an extra pawn already. And if I had to bet, I think it was the D5 pawn that was picked up. I'm going to do a quick action replay of how we got here. So it started as a queen's pawn opening, and I believe it was a queen's gambit decline, and it was where you don't take the c4 pawn, you don't take the gambit, you decline it. Development, all of this is standard opening moves. The bishop comes out to f4, opening up the diagonal for the other bishop to develop. Grischuk captures the diagonal. All this looks absolutely fine. H3, taking away some squares, and this is where Firouzja starts to have some fun. He attacks the bishop, and he goes on to next hit the defender of the d5 pawn. He's taking a lot of risk because he hasn't developed. I think this is exactly what Grischuk wants. He's given up a pawn for initiative. White's lacking any coordination in his pieces. Bishop to d6, trying to exchange an active piece. We saw h4 here. And this is the current position. c6 attacking the knight, and Firouzja trades off the bishop on d6.
So here, we are not very comfortable if we're black. Bishop d6 has been given the exclam, basically getting into place on the diagonal to prevent black from castling, and allowing black to capture, saying, yeah, that's fine. I get that there's a knight here on d5, but more important right now is keeping your king in the center.
So Grischuk has to make a choice here. He can either capture the knight on d5 or the bishop on d6. And I think both have their own drawbacks. The reason that Firouzja took on d6 is that if you capture the bishop, which you really want to, as you pointed out, it stops the king from getting to safety. White has vacated a really nice square for the knight to fall back to. You couldn't have allowed that bishop to remain, and wow, Firouzja instead goes back the other way. A question mark. I'm not sure why, because it also looks like a good move.
Yeah.
And h6 immediately striking. And maybe this is the reason, because now there's an unpleasant choice. Grischuk wants to take on g5. Again, the development, White's development coming into play. You're up a pawn, but all your pieces are out of play right now. Pawn takes pawn is a big threat. If you were to capture on h6, Grischuk will recapture with the rook. The h4 pawn will be under fire for the rest of the game, giving enough counterplay because you've created a weakness. I think Grischuk's managed to find his compensation for that pawn.
I think so. And part of me is asking the question, why did we go into these super crazy, like all sorts of complications, sidelines from Firouzja, if simply playing the knight back to c3 was the continuation? I feel like it feels like there should have been a way to keep the attack alive. I can't see what it would have been, Tanya, but it feels very weird that at the end of all of that, oh yeah, one move just like disentangles the attack and we just, get back. That doesn't sit well with me at all. I feel like something else should have been on the cards there for White.
And that's something else. The more I think about it, it looks like it should have been knight f4, especially after we saw Grischuk's idea of h6, which would have stopped it as well. Knight c3, I think, played a bit in haste right now with Firouzja. And after h6, we do have a move. He does develop that knight finally. And it does block the pin on the h-file. So after pawn takes pawn, I believe you want to recapture with your pawn. You never want to create an h4 weakness for the rest of the game.
Sure, yeah. That's going to be incredibly frustrating to have to deal with for sure. And then you've got all sorts of fun tactics like if you're not careful, a knight on g5 can get taken at an opportune moment. And of course, with your rooks not connected, if you're playing with the white pieces right now, that is a big, big threat. You're still not castled. If you go long, well, there's no C pawn there in front of your king. But if you go short, you've moved your H and G pawns up to the next postcode. So I feel like there are some positional questions to be asked of Firouzja right now. He's definitely not out of the fire yet. But like you pointed out, Tanya, if he's able to navigate these positional challenges that Grischuk is setting him, well, guess what? We've got the extra pawn going into the endgame.
But that's always the thing about these, well, I don't want to call this a gambit because I believe this must have been some sort of an over-the-board inspiration. Also, that time consumption seems to imply that it wasn't some kind of a theory that they walked into. There's always going to be tactics on the board because it's an open position and these strategic considerations, which is what gives Grischuk the compensation. I'm expecting Grischuk to find safety on with long side castle at some point. The knights are beautifully placed at the center of the board. The bishop can step one step ahead on f5. Also a really nice spot. The idea is to play on the light squares eventually. And the big question, as you correctly pointed out, is that for Alireza, where will he find king safety? The more I look at it, I don't believe it will be on the short side, especially with this g5 tension with h6. I think at some point we're going to see Alireza go on with a queenside castle as well. But it's so difficult to imagine that being safe.
Yeah, queenside castle with that light squared bishop absolutely bearing down towards b1. Just feels danger town all over it. And those knights are just one or two moves away from supporting that bishop. There are some really, really big holes, for example, on d3 that you would be eyeing up if you were playing with the black pieces right now. And it feels like that where the attack goes from here seems to firmly be in black's camp. White doesn't want to capture on h6. The attack's not necessarily going anywhere after that. So black queenside castles, and suddenly, yes, there's a bishop on the long diagonal on g2. No, it's not looking at anything right now. If black can get a knight out to b6 and just firm up the control over the d5 square, for example, I feel like the initiative is firmly in black's favor.
I think it just appears as if Grischuk has got the compensation that he was looking for. Let's quickly check in with the Magnus board. I do believe that the fun is happening on this one right now. But let's take a quick peek on the matchup where Magnus, if he wins with white, he takes the match. Levon, he's down on the match. And what has he managed to create with the black pieces? Wow, John, I look at the position and I can't imagine a universe where black manages to win this one. And the reason for that is, yes, Magnus has got this a4 pawn, which is a weakness. But then there's also the b7 pawn, which is a huge weakness. Right now, is Levon threatening to take on a4? Because he's just made the move rook to c7, defending the b7 pawn.
It looks like he might be. It's really weird to see rooks connected on the 7th with the pawn between them as well. I feel like in terms of harmony of pieces here, white is certainly... White's choir is singing more harmoniously than black for sure. I mean, what a fantastic square for the knight on e5. You can't play f6 to kick it, which would introduce some crazy light square weaknesses for that light squared bishop. This is just really, really continuing to place your pieces on very obviously great squares. And Magnus is doing a tremendous job of improving that. That said, you're right. I don't exactly see like any sort of massive killer blow immediately. And I am looking at that a4 pawn, wondering how tasty it might actually be.
And it could have been picked up on the last move. And this is strategic idea of knight e5 involving tactics. Because, in fact, rook takes pawn would have been a massive mistake. And an idea that eventually missed. Queen takes rook. And this is beautiful geometry. It looks like you've just won a pawn. And if the queen goes to b6 attacking the rook, the knight goes back to e8. But actually, white has a really sneaky rook to a1, and suddenly the queen on a4 is in big danger. The only square available is queen b5. Yes, the rook comes in. The f7 pawn falls. Everything falls. You give a check, and black's king side just collapses. Knight e4, there's f3, g6, f7 is falling, and this would have been game over, which is why the a4 pawn could not have been taken. So a stunning idea of knight e5, combining strategy with tactics.
I love that. Yeah, and rook a1 at the end of that continuation to allow, like, all of the moves after rook a1, getting the rook down with a check, moving the queen across with check, then picking up the f7 pawn. All of that is fairly easy to see afterwards, but getting to the position where you can see that rook a1 is the start of that continuation, that's what's really important there. So that a4 pawn, unlikely to go anywhere at the moment. Black has that problem to solve before he can threaten taking that extra pawn. Nice stuff.
Really beautiful that line was, and now the point is that the rook and the queen defend it. Meanwhile, the two rooks on the b file are putting pressure down on the b7 pawn. The knight on e5, it might even find itself rerouting to c5, where you can start targeting the b7 pawn. It looks really pleasant. The bishop playing a beautiful role, taking away key squares from the rook. Watch out, an attack on the c7 rook, and you might end up losing it. I think Magnus Carlsen has done everything right in this game.
Tanya, let's quickly take a look at Grischuk Firouzja. I'll do a hot swap here, because not only has a double exclam been played on the board, but crucially, it's been played on the board with 1 minute remaining on Grischuk's time. I love this. Knight d5. Absolutely. Wow. Taking this position and saying, stuff that. I've got some delicious attacks incoming. That is fun stuff. So I guess the threat here is if pawn takes, not only have you got rook c1 check, but the light squared bishop is coming in via d5 as well. And it looks like black's going to have to give up material to stave off the attack.
Rook c1 just looks like it's game over, because you have to put your knight on an eternal pin, move away your queen from this attack, and then pick up the knight on the next move, and this is busted. Knight d5 is stunning, and I'm going to do a super quick action replay, because we left it here, and it just arrived out of nowhere, John. Because he first brings the queen, pins the knight, takes on g5, and at this moment, the bishop attacks the queen falls back, and look at this, boom, you attack my queen, I attack yours, hitting that queen on e7, queen d6, trade it off, and the knight comes back, and now that extra pawn that we've been talking about, it's the endgame. There's no compensation, John. This is Alireza's game. He's up on the clock. He's up on the material.
So that brilliant tactic that we saw, even though it wasn't game ending, it actually was game ending. Okay, it might not necessarily be as sexy, but for those of you watching at home, basically, Firouzja put Grischuk in a position where he had to make a decision between two outcomes. One, he loses the game. Brilliant tactic. Two, he diffuses the tension in the position. He's forcing Grischuk to say there's no tension left here, and I can just play this endgame a pawn up. And that's effectively what's just happened.
Really nicely put. Because that little sequence, yes, it doesn't win on the spot, but it forces a queen trade. A queen trade in a position where you're down a pawn and your main idea is to get to your opponent's king. And how are you going to do that when the queens are off the board? There are no weaknesses in white's pawn structure. Now there's no apparent pin on the H-line. The knight can join the game from a beautiful f4 square, which is what Grischuk is trying to stop. He attacks the g5 pawn. I'm expecting a pawn storm at the center of the board and the extra material to start counting at some point. Alireza putting the pressure. This potentially could be a match in 3.
I was going to ask the question, but the rook's been moved to g1. I was going to ask you, Tanya, does it feel like it's too weakening on the light squares for white to play something like f4 and then start to eye up e4? Are we worried that the pawns get held on the light squares if we do that?
I really like it as well. You have to find a way to start pushing these pawns at the center of the board. You could start with e4. You could start with f4. You could also jump in with the knight, but I'm not sure what happens with rook takes pawn. I would not want to allow it, even though that looks very tempting, because you simply take the bishop, and he goes for this idea. And the whole tactic relies around creating more weaknesses. I'm expecting the bishop to land on h3, rook on g5 under attack, the pawn on e6 under attack. Alireza is playing this flawlessly. Grischuk down on 3 seconds. He's down a pawn. He's down on the clock. This is looking bad. You can take on G7. I don't know how he saves this one. How does this even get to game 4?
Yeah, 5 seconds looking rough. The cow is laughing in the background here for Alireza Firouzja. He still has to find a way to convert, but Grischuk is the one being asked all of the questions right now. 7 seconds and counting. They've got 2-second increment for each move, but there's just so much to try and survive. Maybe knight into e4 to try and reconnect those central pawns and get something rolling here that does actually get played. I'm not sure it's enough, though. That square looks actually quite juicy on c5, especially if the rook is pinning the other knight.
It's over.
But how much time have you realistically got left?
It's over. Grischuk just resigns after 94, or he got flagged. Either ways, it doesn't really matter because the position's completely busted after 94, but we've got action on the other one. Alireza Firouzja goes through in the winner's bracket in a match in 3. Let's quickly jump over to Magnus versus Levon. Can Magnus do the same?
So this is Magnus Carlsen, Levon Aronian. A6 has just been played in this game where actually the knight on d6 is defending the pawn on b7. So maybe we need a little bit of a history lesson here. I'm not sure, but the moves are coming in thick and fast. It looked like that a6 pawn was free, but it's now still getting ignored. I'm not sure what's going on.
It's crazy because if you take it with the pawn, that's so tempting. Black wants to give a check with the queen and bring the rook into the attack and then start threatening all kinds of checkmates. So that's going to be disaster. I don't believe you can take the b7 pawn. A takes b7 would be running into a lot of trouble for Magnus. But can he not simply capture with the rook instead?
That is the question now, isn't it?
He goes for it.
It's a question we're about to see answered. 20 seconds left for both players, by the way. So this is prime. We have seen this, by the way. Magnus Carlsen has made mistakes in this match. Levon Aronian has made mistakes in this match. So do not take anything for granted at this point, folks. Rook even coming back to e1 to prevent sacrificial ideas on e3 here. So there's a lot of action here. Attempting to swap queens as well from the side of Magnus Carlsen. Obviously, a draw is potentially good enough. There is so much on the line. Levon Aronian wants to find a way through, but if he can't find a way through here, Tanya, he does still have one more game as an opportunity.
But he's putting in the tricks because he's given up the e4 pawn to open up the diagonal, and it's still a game for all 3 results. Yes, Magnus has an extra pawn, but Levon's queen and rook, they want to start attacking that white king. c5 comes in with a check. He's going to pick up this d4 pawn. Magnus, meanwhile, has a check of his own on the central e5 square to regain material. To me, it just looks like the pawn formation that Magnus has, it should keep his king safe. I don't see how you're breaking in with black. And the rooks come off the board. Magnus is up a pawn. I wonder if he's going to go for a full point on this, or is he going to just agree for a draw and take it to game 4? Because yes, it's 4 versus 3, but it's doubled F pawns.
Yeah, I feel like there's a good chance that they swap the half point here. But let's see. Magnus will still have a brief think about every possible scenario where he can think of a way to squeeze out an advantage of some description, but Levon Aronian here trying not to let that happen.
I think that's a good... Sorry, John, go on, but...
I was just going to say queen endgames mean that anything is possible because we've seen enough of these at the Olympiad where I thought a game was going to go one way then the other. So these scare me, Tanya, if I'm honest.
I think Magnus is going to play this on for a while because he's got that extra pawn. You know, one wrong move and a queen trade and it's over. Lev's on 4 seconds. It's not, he'll have to earn this draw. Lev will have to still sweat this one out.
And with so many, I can't think of I can't think of another endgame, Tanya, where there are as many one move potential mistakes that you can make that changes the outcome of a game than in queen endgames when there are still pawns on the board and other pieces on the board. So you're right. Magnus is forcing Levon Aronian to absolutely earn this. And why not? Both players are down to just a couple of seconds, but as we know, Magnus is an absolute, well, they're both absolute beasts when it comes to speed chess, but Magnus is just so unbelievably comfortable. He's going to exhaust this until there are no pawns left on the board.
And Lev's done everything right so far, but he's playing on those very last seconds. He needs to continue doing what he's doing, and it's never easy in these positions. Magnus, an absolute beast in these queen pawn endgames. Nobody plays them like he does, but it's too few material left. Notice how the black king, it's stopping the H pawn from going anywhere further. The F pawn is defended. It looks like Magnus has maximized his position. As long as Lev can avoid those queen trades and fall into any kind of tricks with a check, he's good.
Oh,
what happened there? There was
briefest
a moment.
flash.
Oh, he had to move the king. Oh my goodness, we'll show this at the end if we get a moment, but there was a blunder that was made and Magnus missed it.
I mean, to be fair, they're playing these moves on about 0.3 seconds at the moment. They are absolutely blitzing this out. But that was but the potential opportunity that Magnus was looking for. I should also point out that if Magnus can manufacture these opportunities on just 2 seconds left on the clock, they've got 2 seconds of increment. He can absolutely do that again. So do not count this out yet. Just because there was a brief flash of a blunder, that does not mean this game is over, not by a long shot. Magnus continuing to make Aronian deserve this draw.
And you have to watch out. You come to the 8-7 square, this move would have come in with a check. It's so easy to fall for these tactics. Again, both players on their last second. Levon survived a scare there. Magnus looking for a way for the king to come closer to that black pawn. Lev stops it. So far, everything under control. Don't trade the queens. And I think now there are just too many checks and Magnus's queen is badly placed. You don't have a way to actually stop the perpetual. And this does eventually end in a draw. Or will at least end in a draw in this moment as we see the repetition.
Yeah, there's no queen check to interpose on h3, so the draw has been agreed. Magnus Carlsen leads Levon Aronian by 2 points to 1. Levon Aronian now in a must-win situation in the final game if he is to progress. This is huge. Let's go ahead and take a look at the scoreboards and show us what is going on right now. But they are splitting the point here in game number 3. Really delightful stuff there. And this now means Levon has his back against the wall. Magnus Carlsen leads that match 2-1, and Alireza Firouzja in the meantime has defeated Alexander Grischuk 2.5 to 1/2. That's not the last we're going to see of Grischuk though in this tournament, Tanya. There's plenty more action in the losers bracket because he goes there instead. But Firouzja through to the finals. That is going to be delightful for him, even though he's already punched his ticket to Norway.
Absolutely. Alireza Firouzja showing incredible form today against Grischuk, who will be on his last live. Meanwhile, for Magnus Carlsen, he almost got it done in this one, and I think that's good news for Lev and his fans because that has to give him some confidence that he was able to hold this endgame against the mighty Magnus. For Grischuk, of course, he still lives on in the tournament. The action continues.
So that does mean we have a game number 4 coming up here in the winners bracket semi-finals, folks. Still all to play for. For those of you who are just joining us, or maybe were joining us mid-broadcast, this is the penultimate day, I believe, of the Julius Baer Generation Cup. Let's take a look at the winners final and exactly how that's shaping up by going to our scoreboard. We already have one name. Alireza Firouzja has defeated Alexander Grischuk to make their way into the winners final. Magnus Carlsen also 1 foot in the winners final as well. All he has to do is make a draw with Levon Aronian in the final game to get himself into that final. But Tanya, I think in every single game those two players have played so far, there's been at least one moment where the game's been able to swing both ways. So that future is far from written.
Absolutely. Well, whoever makes it to this one, it's going to be a mouth-watering clash. But Magnus Carlsen looking good. He's got the black pieces. Levon with that final white. He has to go all out in this one. And once again, he will try to get Magnus out of the book. You know, he's managed to do that. He will get his creativity on. We're in for a big fight in this final round.
I'm looking for opportunities for Levon Aronian to come back, he's going to take solace knowing that he's been able to review the games and he can see that there's been an opportunity, right, in each of those 3 games so far. Tanya, this is something you don't necessarily get to do all the time in over-the-board chess, where, of course, if you review these games played online really quickly, you can see that there were chances. So Levon knows that Magnus is not infallible. He knows that there is a possibility of him winning this last game and going to Armageddon. But how do you change your mentality? Just knowing your opponents can be beaten is very, very different to actually beating them, right?
It also helps to know that only one result works for you, right? You have to go all out. It doesn't, a draw is as good as losing right now for Levon. He had this huge opportunity in game 1, but game 2 and game 3, it did feel as if Magnus was the only one pushing, and then eventually getting that win in game 2, where you couldn't hold that queen down position, you ran out of time. And then game 3, I think Levon, that was a great show by him, keeping his defenses in a very difficult queen pawn ending one more time. You're down a pawn against Magnus, never an easy task. He's got to be feeling good about the quality of chess that he's shown today. Levon, he's played creatively. He's created his chances when he did get them. It felt like he got flagged in a position which he should have held. He's got his chance. It's never easy against Magnus, but I still keep thinking about that missed opportunity in round 1 and how different this match would have been had Levon just played king to f7.
Exactly right. I feel like we can always point back to pivotal moments in a match, and I think you called it absolutely spot on there in game number 1, where Aronian was had the opportunity to mate Magnus. That would have been huge and a very, very different match instead. Is it just me, by the way, Tanya, or as Magnus, as the number of points increases, so does his hair?
I see what you mean. It's
like Dragon Ball out there. It's just getting more and more powerful.
I think we need one of those memes, which came out where Magnus's hair keeps growing and getting bigger and bigger, because his chest is definitely as big as ever. And for Levon, meanwhile, he's got to show some big moves in this final rapid game to take it into Armageddon. He starts with white, right? And once again, I want to just draw to the point that getting flagged in game 2, I feel like that's really not something that you feel too bad about, because you're on the defense for a really long time. You don't know that objectively you found a fortress. But I really think that for Lev to get over what happened game 1, especially after analyzing it right after the round, would have made things difficult. He has to leave all of that behind. Easier said than done. Magnus needs only a draw to fix up a match against Alireza, a match that we've become used to at the Champions Chess Tour. For Lev, a must-win.
All right, so game number 4 is about to begin. We're going to select that game and head straight on in. The players are getting ready to make their first moves now. Magnus Carlsen versus Levon Aronian. And this is must win for Levon if he is to progress any further. And even if he wins, that gets us to Armageddon. I'm looking for any telltale signs on his face, any telltale signs in his body language. And Tanya, quite honestly, I'm seeing absolutely nothing. Levon's poker face is supreme.
That's a good sign. You don't see disappointment or frustration on his face. It starts with the king's pawn. We've got the Italian, the Geico piano. This is all the main line. We've seen Levon play this so many times. It's one of his pet positions. It also means that he's not going for any... This is actually the first time that we're seeing a very standard mainline theory between these two players today. So he just wants to get a position that he's very familiar with. Now, this move by Magnus, it takes control of the g5 square, stopping bishop g5. Not just that. What Magnus is saying is if the white was to go short castle before black puts his king on the king side, we might see a g5 by Magnus.
Oh, goodness. Magnus needs to draw. Will Magnus play something? I'd love to see that in this game. I want to see g5. I want to see... I don't think we're going to with the C and D pawns moves. I want to see opposite sides castling. I want to see all sorts of craziness. Oh, that's definitely not going to happen with A4, but a boy can dream, right?
Opposite side castling too much. G5, you might get what you wish for, because again, notice how both players are delaying their decision to castle. Levon knows if he castles, Magnus has a very quick g5, g4, especially because an h3 hook has been created. And Magnus, he keeps delaying his own king to safety because he's hoping that Lev would allow that, but he doesn't.
I love the way you've just described that as well, because to a lot of players, myself included, you're thinking, okay, h3, sensible prophylactic move, let's prevent a bishop or a knight getting on it. No. Tanya sees that, and you go, hook, let's go. Charge those pawns up the board. Every move has a downside if you're not careful. So I think that's a great way to think about this. It's a long-term commitment playing that and recognizing that it also makes Magnus Carlsen's potential attack that much stronger. We don't know he's going to do that yet, though, but I want to see the bishop move, the queen come out to d7, queenside castles, and g5. That's my dream for this position. Oh...
We didn't get that. We got the shot castle. Magnus, meanwhile, has managed to reroute his knight to the king side, controlling the f4 square. And there are always ideas of striking in the center with d5. Meanwhile, for Levon, he still has to spend the tempo getting his own king to safety. But the way I see this, if Black is able to strike first in the center, usually in these openings, you're doing fine. If Lev goes shot castle, I don't see what's stopping Magnus from getting the dream d5 on the board. We might see it.
We could very well see it, actually. There's you're right. It doesn't feel like there's anything stopping it. There we go. D5 is on the board now. So cracking open the position is Magnus Carlsen. We're castled, where we just need to move the light squared bishop, then development is complete. Our knights are ready to start hopping into the center of the board. The bishop's on a lovely square on a7, watching the white king. Let's go ahead and get the party started.
It's definitely started on this one because in the Italian, it's all about white getting d4 or black getting d5. And it's Magnus who strikes first. Now, the one thing is that the e5 pawn can become a target, which is what Levon goes for, rook e1. And look at this move by Magnus, c6. He doesn't defend the pawn. He's looking for counterplay. If you were to take knight takes pawn, and I'll just have that line on the board, you open up a key diagonal. Rook e5, there are tactics. I was eyeing this diagonal, but immediately you realize that bishop takes pawn works on the spot, king takes f2, you bring the king out to give a check and eventually win that rook. So Lev doesn't have the time to capture on e5, you lose big material, so a nice way to defend that pawn. Instead, Levon strikes on d4, and we see a trade. So the center, John, has been completely liquidated, and I think black should be really happy with that because you pointed out a really nice sniper on a7.
Well, and I think you've really underlined that point as well, Tanya, with those tactics, with the bishop coming back to b8 or the queen coming back out to f6, which is black has such sexy control of the dark squares in this position that it's very difficult for white to play against that. Sure, d4 is a little bit of a counterpunch, but you're not dislodging that dark squared bishop anytime soon. So if you want to get your dark squared bishop on the same diagonal, you can play the bishop out to e3, for example. But that knight on d5 is ready to chop it off at a moment's notice. Or the other knight for black might even go back to e7 so that it can recapture. If the players could please stop playing moves faster than I can say them, that would be great, but we no longer have that piece on the board. Crucially, though, the dark squared bishops and the same theme we're talking about is still here. White's still trying to bring the bishop out so that we can swap off specifically for that monster on a7. That has not changed.
And I like the way Lev has handled it because he first traded on e8, seemingly looks like he's giving up control of the e file, but it's all to get a long-term weakness on d5. Yes, he gives Magnus a bishop pair in an open position, but it's imbalanced because now he does get a beautiful target, the d5 pawn, the isolated queen's pawn that can come under fire once the queen lands on a nice square. Also, the knight on d4 sits pretty right now. Magnus, he's got moves to make because the rook on a8 is not in the game, and I'm looking at ideas like developing the bishop, trying to finish that development. It feels like Levon has to find a way to win this game, so he had to go in this line where he gives up that bishop pair to try to create some weaknesses, a desperate weakness to target eventually at black's camp.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to figure out where that critical breakthrough might come. I love that. Yes, exactly. I was looking at queen b3, trying to figure out how everything can be defended at once, because in an ideal world, queen b3 played, you don't really want to have to play a groveling move like bishop c6 and you're using your bishop as a glorified pawn to sort of keep everything together. It's possible, it's not losing or anything like that, but it's like you're really giving away your initiative if that's the kind of move we're thinking about playing, right? So this
You might have to, right?
I'm
I don't
looking
see
for the
another way to defend
alternative.
both pawns.
Is there a way to defend one of the pawns but create counter-attacking chances that and make one of them a bit poisoned? I don't know.
I see Lev's play has really inspired you today. Give up material and go for peace activity.
Yeah. I'm looking for ways to bring the queen out so that if queen takes b7, you've got some sack on the king side or something. I'm not seeing anything, but that's where my brain's going.
Yeah, it's tough to think because not enough pieces to give that firepower for the sacrifice. For example, you could line up the queen and the bishop and start thinking about an h3 sacrifice, get your knight to h4. Now that I say that idea aloud, it feels like it could be a little scary, but I believe white's queen at the center of the board should be good enough to defend everything because you're in time to come back with your own queen. Bishop c6 might be a necessity. Not a happy move to make, though. I completely agree with you.
And certainly, yeah, not a happy move to make if you're Magnus Carlsen as well, because if you're busy maneuvering your pieces to get them on the absolute perfect squares, you're thinking about where to place the rook on a8, and then a move like queen b3 comes in that forces you to interrupt your plans, to play a piece to a square you really don't want to play it to, and you might be forced to recapture, giving your opponent a little bit more initiative as well. That's... In a game of chess, that's a really, really tiny thing overall. It's not going to be, that's not moving an eval bar, but in his head, it's going to be such a huge frustration.
Which is why Magnus is taking such a long time in this position. He knows bishop c6 is the only way to defend both pawns at once, but it's such an unhappy move to make that he physically doesn't want to. He's trying to look for any way that he can create that initiative. He doesn't find it, so eventually he goes for it. And Levon, he jumps in with the other knight. Now you can see some makings of an attack on the king side, potential sacrifices that Magnus might need to be careful about. G7, 8-6 squares. I don't see anything immediately, John, but it starts looking a bit scary for black.
It is, and I think not necessarily the saving grace, but I think the one thing that's making me feel a little bit calmer about this position is that the white queen is on a light square, although we're maneuvering it now. So I'm looking for follow-ups on the dark squares for white. If the queen is on a dark square in front of the black king, then suddenly knight takes h6, knight takes g7, bishop takes h6. They become a lot more scary if the queen is somewhere like g3, for example. But it is going to take a few moves to get there. This isn't instantaneous. I'm sure teleport chess is a variant, but not the one that we're playing here today. So there's still opportunity to prevent any of these shenanigans happening. And I think as long as Levon's queen stays on a light square, we're not completely worried. Not yet.
Not yet. And queen c2, we see him rerouting. The queen's done its job. It's forced Magnus's pieces into defense. Now, sort of just eyeing the king side from here, gets that queen back. There's nothing direct. We might even see an expansion on the queen side at some point with the b pawn moving forward. But wow, he got back with the knight, and that's a question mark.
Whoa.
And we've got a move being pointed out. Big moment here for Magnus.
So d4 is the move Magnus needs to find. And that's a very difficult move to find because the pawn on c3, the bishop on e3, the knight on f3, the knight on f5, they are all looking after the d4 square. So this is not an immediately obvious move to make. It must have something to do with, opening the lines up to the light squared bishop or something. Magnus does not play that move. It's a trade on e3 instead. That's so difficult to see.
And that was a big moment. And I have no doubt, as you say, John, that it was all about getting that bishop into activity.
All right. So we do have a trade on e3, followed by the knight coming into f4 now for Magnus Carlsen, potentially surviving a moment there. But I think it's also fair to say that was pretty difficult, not only to see, but to see the continuation of. The rook now comes into e4, and Magnus continues to pile on the pressure. There's no good entry square for the queen at the moment. So the queen might be eyeing up squares like f5. F5 and g4 are completely blocked off by the white knights. In fact, every single light square on that diagonal is completely blocked off by those knights. So a tricky position still for Levon Aronian, just because there was a big shot with d4 that Magnus did not play, does not mean this position is getting any more pleasant. Tanya, maybe it's worth us, before the game goes too much longer, maybe it's worth us rewinding to that position and taking a quick look at how d4 might have played out.
Let's bring up our analysis board, and it was right here where Magnus had this huge opportunity, and it was all around opening up that light square bishop. A big pawn, but it could become a monster with the move d4. Notice how white has got 4 defenders, but it doesn't matter what you capture with. Let's say you take with a knight. Black trades a pair of knights, and the whole idea is that you get a key square for your own knight to jump into the attack. G2 is a point that's super tender. Yes, you can pick up the bishop, but after queen takes c6, it's almost impossible to defend the G2 pawn, or even if you didn't capture that bishop, because the e3 bishop is hanging. f3 runs into rook takes bishop, and this would be game over.
Wow.
So after d4, because of tactics around the knight jumping into the attack, it is impossible for white to capture. I just want to show one quick line. For example, after knight d4, let's say you take with the bishop and you decide to take with your own bishop. Now there are other problems because the bishop jumps in with a double attack winning material. So a bishop that felt like a dead piece, the one on c6, would become the crowning jewel in black's position with ideas on e4 and g2.
That's absolutely ridiculous. Thanks for showing us that line, Tanya. That is incredible. And I absolutely have to agree with chat. Why is it that we keep getting taught these principles in chess, and then when I watch the super GMs, they never follow their own advice? I feel like maybe that's why I'm on the broadcast a little bit, to give a voice to the little guy here. But it's true. Sometimes I look at the moves that these absolutely supreme players are playing, going, well, hang on a second. No one ever taught me to do this. What's going on? I thought chess was sorted. I thought we figured all this out. Clearly not. These guys are absolute geniuses is what they do. And Magnus Carlsen continuing to try and ramp up the pressure on Levon Aronian. You could be fooled by the eval bar going, oh, well, that's completely down the middle. Okay, but if you play as white or black as a club level player here, it's so difficult to find the thread and know what you're doing. This is a very complicated, very tricky mid-game.
And that's the beauty of chess, because it's so concrete as well, you know. But that move d4, I think it's also a very strategic idea, as well as involving tactics. You know, it has the principle, you've got this isolated queen pawn, you want to often sacrifice it for piece activity. And I think if Magnus just slowed down at that moment, he would have found it. We found it because we had the computer with that blue arrow telling us d4 is the best move. Magnus does it better than the computers, but I think he might have just rushed that moment. And now we see that despite missing that, he's the one who's putting the pressure, because compare the pieces on the board. The queen and the rook supremely centralized. Meanwhile, for Lev, his own queen and the rook are on opposite side of the board with no direct threats right now. Black's knight on d3, tying down white's queen to that f2 pawn, looking like a dangerous piece. The bishop from d7 also eyeing both sides off the board. Yes, Lev has a really active knight on d4. He's trying to create threats with his own knight. The computer helps out again. Rook to e1 is a very, very strong resource in this position, forcing white to capture on e1, h2 square, guarded by the queen. The queen jumps in, and the c3 pawn will fall after that. It's on the board, John.
Oh, goodness gracious me. The pressure is beginning to tell. Magnus Carlsen now starting to turn the screw on Levon Aronian. The pawn on c3 has fallen. You might be thinking, well, hang on a second, that's a bit of a pawn grab. No, it's not. It's a pawn grab and an attack on the knight on d4, for example. So this is very far from concluded. Now, admittedly, the pawn on d5 is looking a little bit loose right now. But if white were to capture that, I guess black can take the knight on g4 first and then have the initiative with what to play next. Maybe even playing the queen back to c7 with a check. or potentially even playing knight takes f2 in some position. So I guess those are the two lines you'd have to look at.
You're absolutely right. Yes, you want to capture the d5 pawn, but you lose the f2 pawn, which is so important in Lev's position. You simply get rid of that defender on g4, and this is just collapsing. Levon's clock advantage is dwindling. The position in big trouble right now. This looks busted to me. You're down a pawn. You don't have a way to recapture on d5. Lev sidesteps with that queen. Magnus recaptures the knight. Now the check that you were pointing out earlier. If the king falls back on the first rank, thank you very much. Let's get rid of the queens. You're up a pawn. Queen c1 would force a queen trade.
Yep. It looks like that might be what we're about to force here. Now, if the queens come off here, does Magnus feel like... So Magnus is playing to win. He's not gonna be thinking along the lines of, I want to make a draw. He wants the full point here, but g3 gets played anyway. So at least that's no longer on the cards. But where does white go from here? Can we find a way to use the double G pawns by playing f4 and getting something rolling? Like, I'm struggling to find a different idea.
You would probably have to do something drastic like that. And the computer's pointing out the best move is queen to e7, perhaps trying to get the queen to g5. Ideas like that where you want to target the g4 pawn and a queen trade. But I don't think that could be the only move. I'm sure there are other moves, other resources that black has. You're up a pawn in this position. Your pieces are nicely placed. The king is really safe. I don't see any trouble for Magnus, but he does slow down. So perhaps he is a little worried about your threat of f4, the knight jumping onto f5, just trying to create some tricks against the black king. And he's trying to trade off more pieces.
Okay, that makes sense. Instant check coming in, by the way. The king retreats to h7, and then the knights come into f5. So extremely active piece placement by Aronian here. But at the end of the day, I'm wondering if all these pieces get traded off, that unopposed d pawn that's currently on d5 could well be the difference maker. And that has me really, really worried. And Magnus perhaps underlining that point here by, instead of playing some absolutely explosive move that has us all glued to our chairs in bewilderment, just going to play d4 and ask Levon, look, here's a problem. What are you going to do to solve it?
He's unleashed a d-pawn, which can actually, John, be picked up right now. Knight takes pawn is a tactic that exists, but this is so smart and professional by Magnus. He hasn't missed this. Knight takes pawn, knight takes... Let's just have that on the board really quickly. And white does have a check on e4. Yes, you win this knight back, but this is just a dead equal queen pawn endgame, which black holds every single day. You've got the healthier pawn structure, no problem at all. You've gotten rid of white's trickiest piece. So Magnus doing a very professional thing here, where he's giving up his material advantage to simply win the match.
Okay, so Magnus perhaps offering the draw effectively to Levon Aronian here, saying, you know what, I do just need to draw this game in order to win the match. What are you going to do about it? Pawn does get taken, so we do go into this line. Now, the one thing I would say, Tanya, that perhaps is a little bit worrying is that a dead drawn endgame with queens, especially when we were looking at like classical time controls in the Olympiad, this still gives me the heebie-jeebies every single time we play something like this, because I know that even though the evaluation is going to stay in the middle unless a howler happens, I also know that howlers do happen in queen endgames, and they are just the scariest endgames in chess to play, I think.
You know, Levon right now, I think a mouse slip is the only way that I see him winning this one, because look at black's queen. It's just doing a yo-yo dance from c6 to f3. Really beautiful squares where you defend the b7 pawn and the f7 pawn. It's planted itself now in f3, and Magnus can simply just jump around with the king. Everything's defended. White also has to watch out for his own pawns. I'm just not able to find a danger from anywhere. Yes, you can start bringing your king, but how far are you going to go? There are going to be 100 checks. The point is that Magnus's pawn structure is so healthy. There are no targets in this position for Lev to get to.
Sure. No, you're absolutely right. And the white king is glued to the defense of the f2 pawn as well. You don't want to come up you come up too far, and then there are just too many threats, too many checks. And of course, you can move the white queen to interpose, but you move the white queen, for example, to d3 and b4 drops. So ideally, you want to keep your queen exactly where it is. So what happens instead? We run the risk of, let's say the king comes up to f4. Hang on a second, you might have g5 check, and suddenly all of the initiative and all of the frustrating little tricks are in black's camp. So it's not that easy to move your king out from the relative safety. Oh no, of those pawns. Don't fall into that.
Falls back with the king.
You have to. Like, how do you safely go forward? The only other square to go forward on would be e4, I guess, and you're just dancing your king around in the middle of the board. Like, where's the threat?
Well, there's one threat on b7 right now, and I'm expecting Magnus to just go on giving a million checks, because how is this king running all the way to b6 without losing the f2 pawn? You have to come back and perhaps try to just zigzag your way to g2, which is why Magnus decides not to continue with the checks and falls back to a nice c7 square where he just defends everything.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is the king started on g2, right? We're trying to make progress from being in the corner there. Magnus does move a pawn, offering to simplify the position slightly, change the dynamic ever so slightly. And he uses this as a weapon, as a trick, to try and change the dynamic, even if it's just a bit. Look for an additional way, buy himself extra time as well, in terms of number of moves, to go after the weaknesses in his opponent's position. And now the king is a little bit further away from the defense of that f2 square. Don't get me wrong, you only need the queen realistically to defend this. So, for example, a move like queen c5 covers both, but then you might have black play a move like queen f3, which could pick up the pawn on f4. So this is becoming more and more complicated on the part of Levon Aronian, and Magnus is just continuing to try and poke holes.
Lev is trying everything in the position, you know. He's really trying to keep the game going, set up some tricks. That queen trade offer was very sneaky. I think it could not have been taken, so Magnus sort of navigating his way correctly. But the thing is, the position just doesn't have enough. And in fact, now you have to be careful of not losing material. So checks coming in. Magnus, he could pick this pawn up, also controlling the c8 square. I think he could have just gone for that. Instead, he's just seen that there are enough checks in the position. Once again, a queen super actively placed, stopping any activity of white. And Magnus now just jumps around with the king as the white queen is tied down to the defense of the a5 pawn.
f4 has been played as well, so the base of that pawn chain is now on g3. That makes it a little bit harder for white to defend that, because it's no longer possible to defend it, for example, from the e5, d6, c7 squares. But nonetheless, I think that we're just going to have a king dancing around, and for me, it means that the king is more likely to be glued to that pawn on g3 and has to go back to that side of the board. But if you do that, you might as well agree a draw right now. So we need to find something different on the path, on the part of Levon Aronian.
And now both players are under 10 seconds. So mistakes can still happen. Lev is going to just continue playing this out. He's not going to just agree for a draw unless there's a perpetual on the board. I don't see that happening, because black cannot allow the king to march all the way to the queen side. That is the dream. If somehow Lev's king can reach this a pawn, then he's got a shot. But I just don't see a path. And Magnus handling this so well. He's playing on seconds. Now he attacks the g4 pawn, which had to be defended. So the white king further away from the a6 pawn.
Could you maybe play the queen to g2 at some point?
Mix it up.
Then you just bring the... There we go. So we're coming into g4. It's
and
now 4v3.
You're just down a pawn now, John. There's no good check to pick up the a6 pawn. Magnus is up a pawn. That's it. Now he can afford to trade the queens.
And on 2.9 seconds left, Aronian is going to struggle here. Oh, I like that. Offering the queen trade in exchange for another queen. A cute little trick in the position, but Magnus is now into simplify mode. He knows that he can just play the rest of this endgame a pawn up. He smells blood in the water. That pawn has been taken, and the computer is not liking that one bit, because we can see that passed h pawn out of nothing, it looks like Magnus Carlsen is about to turn the screw here and try and get a dub in this final game. Levon Aronian needed the win. He's going to settle for the draw. It doesn't matter. Magnus goes through to the winner's bracket final.
Magnus doing Magnus things in that endgame, finds a way to win the pawn, keeps everything under control. A draw is good enough, a repetition on the board. And as you pointed out, now it's Levon Aronian in the loser's bracket, and we get a Magnus versus Alireza's winner final. What a day of chess it's been. Alireza super dominating, John. A match in 3, and Magnus Carlsen gets it done in 4.
Exactly right. And I mean, Magnus Carlsen has spoken before about how he would enjoy playing a player like Firouzja. So it'll be fantastic seeing them clash in the winners final. That is going to be an absolutely epic game that we have tomorrow. Let's take a look at the bracket and how it currently stands. Magnus Carlsen plays Alireza Firouzja in the winners bracket final. In the losers bracket quarterfinals, we've got Grischuk against Vachier-Lagrave. That's going to be fantastic. And Levon Aronian playing Decisive. What a fantastic match that will be as well. It's unfortunate that we're going to have to say goodbye in the lower bracket after those 2 matches. But as it currently stands, the winners final that you're going to see tomorrow, Magnus Carlsen playing Alireza Firouzja. Tanya, that is a jewel in the current crown of chess as far as matchups is concerned.
I couldn't agree more, especially with the kind of chess we've been seeing by both of them when they face each other. Let's not forget, Alireza beat Magnus not once, but twice in the ChessCon Classic, taking that grand final victory. How incredible was that? Magnus has said it so many times, how much he enjoys facing a player like Alireza. He's always up for a challenge. It's going to be a mouth-watering winners final. And meanwhile, we'll also have players down on their last life. 2 will be eliminated. A big day of chess coming up, John.
Exactly right. Absolutely massive stuff. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed watching the stream just as much as we have enjoyed bringing you these games today. And for those of you who have enjoyed it and fancy continuing to check us out, there's still a couple of days left for you to cash in on September on Twitch. That gets you 30% off of your sub, by the way, and it helps make events like this one possible. And that's before we talk about stuff like exclusive new emotes for our events. You get break time content that's exclusive to you because there are no ad breaks as well. So there's all sorts of perks there, but the most important one is that you folks are able to enable us putting on these events. Use !subscribe right now in chat, level up and help support chess.com and these fantastic events that we put on. So Tanya, we've had some absolutely delightful matches today. We've had some potential for wildly different game results. Levon Aronian and Magnus Carlsen springs to mind with those mistakes in their games. There's a lot to look forward to tomorrow.
There's a lot to look forward to tomorrow, but I'm still thinking about all the chess that we witnessed today as well. Such incredible brilliancies were made. We saw some big misses, big opportunities missed by the players, time scrambles, where once again, mistakes happened. Great chess all around, whether it was our losers bracket where we saw Maxime Vachier-Lagrave storm through Jan Nepomniachtchi in that brilliant attacking game 1 where he checkmated him, and then Arjun losing as well. That was a heartbreaking match for Arjun, but as well for Grischuk, to put up that show. Incredible chess all around. And then in the winners bracket, Levon trying to bounce back in game 4. I'm still thinking about that King F7 moment in game 1. What a different match this would have been. And for Alireza Firouzja, I mean, what a day of chess. He just never gave his opponent a chance.
So a lot of mouth-watering moments and heart-stopping moments in today's broadcast. And we saw potential mates on the board, actual mates on the board, mates getting missed, tactics missed, all sorts of crazy stuff. This is the Julius Baer Generation Cup. I hope you guys have been enjoying the broadcast. We certainly have. We are back tomorrow with the winners final and the losers quarterfinals here on chess.com. So make sure if you have a subscribe available on Prime or otherwise, hit that subscribe button now. Help us make these events even bigger and even better for all of you guys, and enjoy the last couple of days of September. For now, though, it's on us to end the show as we see you again tomorrow for the losers quarterfinals and the winners finals here here at the Julius Baer Generation Cup. Who makes it to Norway? We find out as the tournament concludes.